meeting is House Bill 437 relative to reading assessment and intervention program. It's, I think, the second subcommittee meeting we've had. And at our last subcommittee meeting, there was a discussion about various topics, but one of them was college preparation programs in the state. And that is part of what is in HB 437 is an annual report by the department in relation to the college preparation programs and their efforts in reading literacy. So I think Mr. Appleby from the department is here with a couple of people. I don't know if you all three want to join at the same time. If you can, I think there's one more chair. And just press the. One of the things we talked about last meeting, I believe, was the report, the recent report on college preparation from the National Council on Teacher Quality that they did. It was thought that it would be worthwhile to get more information on what's going on at some of New Hampshire colleges. Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Appleby, would you like to introduce who you have with you?
Yes. Thank you, Representative Cordelli. Stephen Appleby, Director, Educator Support and Higher Education at the Department of Ed. With me are Administrator Laura Stone King, who oversees our educator preparation programs statewide. And are you still Dean?
Associate Dean.
Associate Dean Tanya Sturtz from Keene State College, who oversees Ed Prep at Keene.
Great. Looking at that teacher quality program, I think that Keene actually had the best rating in New Hampshire. Would you like to maybe start things off by telling us a little bit about the teacher prep program at Keene?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about our programs. Do you want me to talk about it in reference to literacy?
Yes, please.
I figured it might help focus. I could do 2 hours and just get prep. So in literacy, I will say I am the director of Ed Prep, but I came to Keene State as a professor in special education, and my focus was in literacy. So in about 2016, we created a committee because we realized the elementary education program and early childhood needed more in the area of literacy. We didn't feel like our students were truly prepared. So we made some shifts in our program, and I sat on the committee, and, being the literacy person, I was reading through the stuff. We framed our literacy course based on the National Reading Panel and what was evidence-based. And we created a literacy course that was a foundation course that taught the concepts to our students. And it's open to anybody who wants to take it, but mainly our early childhood and our elementary candidates would take this course. And it really talked about literacy developmentally from birth on. It covered, anything from, when we say literacy, from oral language to reading to writing to all those areas, but it set the foundation so that they were ready to enter Methods 1. Specifically, I'll speak on our elementary, because when they entered our Methods 1, which is an 8-credit course, meaning that they have half field time, half instruction time, they were ready to start working on teaching literacy in the classroom. So our Methods 1 focuses on literacy and social studies. So that was kind of the crux of what we did. We made those changes. And the other piece that we also did is that we made a change in our elementary ed program where students could not enter student teaching until they passed the Foundations of Reading test, and the Praxis 2. So that meant that they had all those tests under their belt, but it also meant that they were at that literacy level so that when they stepped into student teaching, they were able to step in and teach and instruct and really get into that student teaching experience. So those are things that we did, I can speak just specifically to Keene State, to help kind of develop that literacy, which we think is really important for our teachers to know before they enter the classroom. Does that help? Okay.
Thank you. My understanding, and please correct me if I'm mistaken, but the Foundations of Reading is aligned with the evidence-based research and science of reading research that has been done.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yes.
I would add that shift for the alignment with the science of reading and the foundations of reading assessment didn't happen until, I believe, 2016 or 2017. So when you look at pass rates, for example, you'll see a vast difference prior to the alignment with the assessment and after
Okay.
for the better. Yes.
Yes, right. And I think the survey that we looked at, I think I passed out last time, the executive summary was, I think, 2022 or 23, 2022, I guess, probably it was. So, okay. Would you like to talk about generally in the state, the reading and literacy teacher prep?
Sure. So I'm going into my 4th year, I believe, as the administrator overseeing our Ed Prep programs. And we currently have 12 institutions that have approved Ed Prep programs. Ironically, 2 of them do not, or 1 do not offer LED, where the remaining institutions do. That said, some of the work that we just completed was re-examining our approval process for our Ed Prep programs. And as part of that, along with the onboarding of Kate McCaffrey, who's in the back there, our next step will be looking at examining some requirements specific to 5 different licensure areas around the evidence with science of reading, and implementing those. We're hoping to move those through within the next year to ensure that there is a minimum expectation of our Ed Preps within the state. And then what would that look like and how we roll it out?
And when you talk about the licensure, are you referring to specific licenses for educator
Yes.
positions?
So currently that would be in elementary K-6, elementary K-8, early childhood education, early childhood special education, education teacher, reading writing teacher, and reading writing specialist. I listed the elementary separately. In theory, it's one set of standards with an additional requirement for the K-8 piece, but it really is 2 different licenses. So.
And I just want to weigh in. At this time, it is not a requirement, an administrative rule. We're hoping again over the next year that the state board will move forward with the proposal to add a requirement of passing foundations of reading for special ed teacher and early childhood special ed teacher. Today, that test is not a requirement of those 2 endorsements. It is a requirement of the 2 LED endorsements, early childhood, and the 2 reading writing teacher, reading writing specialist endorsements.
I would just add one last thing. One of the things in relation to our Ed Prep programs as part of the review process and standards would be looking at some type of mechanism to include an observation during their clinical hours of reading and writing lesson, formal observation.
Great. Any initial questions from any of the subcommittee or? Well, I'll ask another one then. Maybe back to what's going on at Keene. The National Council survey looked at what maybe are referred to as the 5 pillars.
Yep.
Which include phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, and looked at them based on a number of factors, including instructional hours, and we sort of in the legislation mimic that. In terms of what the state is to report on annually as from each of the colleges. Could you talk a little bit about those 5 pillars and how the instruction is done at Keene?
Oh, wow. That's like a semester course.
Yeah.
Well, because I taught the literacy course. When we teach the 5 pillars, and I will speak when I teach the course, so I can put it on my own name, but we want our teachers to understand the development that happens in the area of literacy. It doesn't begin when they enter kindergarten. And we also don't know, and it's important for future teachers to understand the developmental piece, because we don't always know what students are having before they come into kindergarten. So our teachers have to be prepared for where the students are and what experiences and what knowledge they come in with, because you can't consequence students for what they haven't had, but you have to know where they are so you can develop the skills and help them catch up. So we talk from the importance of oral language and learning, the importance of scribbling and all these pieces and mimicking what we say, and also the rich vocabulary knowledge, how the words we use with our students is important, and reading books. So these are some of those foundational things. But generally, children, when they are in a preschool setting, they get some of the basics of phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, and the alphabetical knowledge, but not all students have those experiences before they come into kindergarten, which is another reason why this phonemic awareness is so important to teach our students, because they have to understand the difference between phonemic awareness and phonics. Phonemic awareness is the manipulation of sounds and individual sounds, and a student's ability to break apart these words into the sound level really plays this foundation in their ability to learn phonics and start decoding and reading. But also the oral language and some of those pieces also come into play when they're learning to read, the rich vocabulary knowledge, and also in the end, the ultimate goal is comprehension. So all these pieces, teaching it through a developmental lens, but also teaching how all these aspects that you talked about, the elements, play into this ultimate goal and also interact with each other is important, because a lot of times teachers will say, oh, a student's struggling with comprehension. Are they struggling with comprehension? You won't know until you do some of these informal assessments to really understand what is affecting their ability to comprehend what they're reading. And it's understanding all these various elements that allow teachers to tease apart and develop instruction that really would meet the needs of students.
Do you have a set number of instructional hours, for instance, for the different categories, different pillars? How does it work practically in terms of their course work?
So we don't, I know the NCTQ does, they look at our syllabi and schedule, and then they calculate hours. We break it to have equal kind of, especially in our literacy course, like time on each of the elements, because they kind of flow into each other. But then we also know that all that comes back in our methods, where they review it again, but then it becomes the practical application and the lesson planning that comes into it. They don't have to take the time in the methods course for them to understand the concepts or to really have some basic ideas on how to teach it and assess it. They get to take it to that next level. So our instructional hours, when we do it, we also think about that wraparound. So they get the first learning of it in the literacy course, it comes back into methods. So there's more instructional hours and the practical application and the observations in the schools. And then the third time it comes around is in our student teaching for elementary education, where we do have one of our key assessments that is tied specifically to literacy. There is actually, we do have an observation that is literacy based on teaching literacy. And it's also for our students to understand. I think the last element to add is that in our ELED program, because it is K to 6, we ensure that through our methods 1, methods 2, and student teaching, that they have different grade experiences. So we try to have it where they have, a kindergarten first and a second, third, and a fourth, fifth, so that they not only learn literacy, but they get to experience how it is, the focus or what it looks like in kindergarten versus second, fourth, fifth, sixth.
Can I just add, I think one of the things that is a strength of Keene State is they're very methodical in those 3 components between introduction of the knowledge and the skills and the concepts. So that would be part 1. And then there's a practice of those, and then where they demonstrate individually. And so that there is purpose in how and when that happens, which I think builds on that strength of learning and implementing those skills as an educator.
Yep.
Teacher prep programs?
There are differences, and it depends on how and when, and the emphasis in how and when those skills are put into place. Right. And then subsequently the evaluation piece that, there's a end component, an assessment component from the institution with the candidates, that they're analyzing their ability to demonstrate explicitly.
Right. Mike, yep. Representative Luno.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Dean Sturts, for joining us this morning. In fact, your whole team today. I was wondering if we could sort of step back a little bit from the teacher prep that you're doing at Keene, and if you could talk a little bit about the instructional methods that are being used by teaching K-3 teachers across the state today, and how our K-3 students are performing in general, and what sort of specific recommendations you have going forward.
Oh, wow. I think that, so you asked me the question, so I'll speak honestly. I think one of the things, and I was reading through the bill and everything, is that I think a lot of schools, because they want to prepare teachers, they rely on programs. And programs aren't the answer. They may have elements that help with the teaching, but what we do is we teach students future teachers how to teach literacy, how to base it. They know what needs to be taught and how to use different elements to truly teach. And I think that it's empowering the teachers today to go back to that, not feel like they have to rely on programs, but rely on evidence-based practices. And we do prepare our teachers to come out, and they know they get a chance to practice it, to create lessons and to do it in a classroom, but then they enter a school. And if they enter a school where they're the new teacher, it is difficult to be like, wait, this is best practice, when maybe they're handed, this is the program we're using at this school. So I think that schools are really doing the best that they can, and they're really working with a diverse population of students, because there's a lot of things going on in schools that are beyond just literacy. So I want to acknowledge that they are working with the students that are in their classroom. But I think it's empowering teachers to do what they're taught to do. How do we get it where they have the ability to look at their students, to do informal assessments, to know what they need, and create lessons that really meet their needs? How do we have these programs that become things that they can use, but not something that they have to use? Or how do they use it that's really best to serve their students based on the evidence, and not feeling like they just have to use the program because that's the program that was purchased for them to use?
clarification on that? Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So when you talk about that, this empowers teachers to be able to use evidence-based instruction practices. Are you talking about House Bill 437 does that, or that your teacher prep, the training you do and the instruction that you provide at Keene State sets teachers up for that?
Well, I know that our preparation does set them up for that. I did notice in the bill, and I did read, there were times that you said instruction, which was really good, and then there's times I saw program. So that's where I make that reference, because I think program, you know, and when you think about all the science of reading and when it came out, it was really an attack on programs that are being used in the schools, not the instruction that is being used in schools. So and I think that by opening it up to instruction, it also allows for professional development to happen. And I know right now the state is offering the LETRS program that a lot of teachers are signing up for. It allows teachers to learn those skills and then start applying them into their classrooms.
Okay, and then another part of the question too, I want to make sure we get this, 'cause
Yeah.
the question had a lot packed into it, is obviously, you know, being a critical factor in preparing teachers and to work with all of our kids across the state. Obviously, there's a feedback loop called "How are the kids doing?" And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. And obviously, we've been through a lot over the last few years, and we're only talking, you know, K3 in a lot of this. So, you
Yes.
know, a lot of these K3 kids, all they've known is pandemic, you know, life, and at least in school. And but I was wondering if you could sort of reflect on that, and also going back maybe, you know, over a longer period, because obviously, you know, we've been teaching kids for a long time now, and you know, grandparents were kids one day, parents were kids at one time, and now kids are kids.
Yeah.
So and you could just sort of talk about how these different generations have been doing.
Wow. So it's interesting because when I teach the literacy course, I teach my students, I say, when I learned how to read, it was whole language. And I remember the struggles I went through learning how to read. And even now when I go to spell, I have to see the word because I didn't learn how to spell and to read phonetically, even though I learned how to teach the next generation. But the things that I was taught as a child are still the way that my brain functions and works. And I use as an example for my students because I say, you know, a lot of us learned how to overcome or how to navigate some of these things. But imagine what would have happened if I would have been taught, you know, phonics or phonemic awareness as a child and not have had those struggles with reading and writing that I may have encountered. It was something I definitely gained strength over my experience and time. But it was something, so when I'm teaching them phonics, I said, or, you know, phonemic, we're doing letter sounds in class, I'm sitting there going, this is something I had to teach myself, and this is not something that's natural, which is why I like to teach it to you. So it's something that you're teaching the next generation. And I think that we have a lot more assessments now that evaluate students, and there are pros and cons to standardized assessments. You know, in the past, we just trusted that the teachers were teaching and students were doing well, and we took SATs, we went to college, and we went on. There wasn't this accountability that we have in place now that, you know, when I was young or generations past. And there's, again, pros and cons to everything. So standardized testing, there is a value in the data, but it's also a sample of one moment. And it's a sample, did the students do what we know they can do? And so I always try to remind my students what standardized testing is. And also that we want to make sure that we don't overuse standardized testing, because now we have a lot of students coming into college that they have this aversion to testing, or they come in saying, I have anxiety to testing, and all these things that come in because of this, the testing that they've experienced. So we're trying to shift that. But understanding that there's standardized testing, and my job is to also teach my students how to do informal assessments. What are these assessments that allow us to really understand what is happening with these students? They're embedded in the classroom, they don't take over a class, and they really capture students' progression in a more authentic way. And then when it comes to the standardized testing, we know what it is, and it's at a point that we can say, okay, this is the big stamp. But it's understanding, I think that's the difference, is in our generation, we are trying to become much more informed when we're creating lessons and knowing where our students are and really creating lessons that are differentiated to meet their needs, instead of just teaching to the whole class and expecting everyone to be at the same place. Did that answer? There was a lot. Did I answer everything?
I would add to that, as I call myself a recovering school administrator. I was a school principal and assistant principal and principal intern for 17 years. If you have districts that have the ability and the knowledge and staff, faculty that are willing, you can really capitalize on what Dr. Sturts was just talking about, with both response to intervention,
Yep.
or a multi-tiered systems and support, so
Yes.
that you're actually able to get to that granular level of where the students are at to fill those gaps, or give the students what they need to get them to where they need to be. And that may mean that my class of 25 students goes beyond the wall of my 25. That may mean that I'm responsible for teaching other classroom students, and other teachers are responsible for teaching mine. That there's a collective share of the education of the child, rather than it's just one person having all the skills. It's impossible for one individual to have all the skills that every child needs every year, with the diverse needs, both educationally and otherwise. But looking at, those informal assessments and benchmarking, and how you are moving the students to really maximize your resources with the student needs.
And thanks for being here. I've got a couple questions. One's is kind of a general one, which may be beyond your purview, but I'm concerned about the role that parents play in the reading of their children learning to read. And you may not have any data on this, but have you looked at the issue of what's happening in homes, for example? Are parents reading to children? Are there books in the home? Are parents, in fact, reading their own books as to create a culture of reading within the home? So, do you have that? That's my first general question.
No, and it's.
You're smiling, so I know.
I'm smiling because
There are so many layers to this.
there is,
And
there really
evidence out there,
is.
actually.
There is evidence about the number of books in our home and all those things, but I really try to teach my students why it's really important for us to understand that parents in general, they have the best interests for their children, but they may not always have the capacity or ability to do all these things, or time. And they may not have had struggles themselves. So I try to make sure that when future teachers understand that our job as educators is not to judge families or to say, why didn't they do this? But to say, where are these students and what do they need? And what can I do to enrich or send books home or do things that may help the student continue to grow? So it's shifting our role of looking at what is it that we can do and engage in that, versus, because there are a lot of things that happen in the home. And I think that changing it from why to, oh, I wonder why, like changing the way that we look at families, because then it becomes this schools are supposed to be places where families feel welcomed and come in and we work with them. And if there's a judgment or why didn't you do this, then it causes families to not want to be part of that learning process. So our job is to welcome the families in and find ways to work together and support them and find out what they need and what we can do to help them. So.
I came up because part of our,
This is Kate McCaffrey.
Hi, I'm
from
Kate
the
McCaffrey.
department.
Yeah, I oversee the literacy initiatives, and one of our initiatives is parents, so parents on the love of reading. And we had a marketing company actually survey New Hampshire parents. And surprisingly, parents are reading and they are going to libraries, and they did respond favorably that they are reading to their children at night. And so we've used that data. We are going to reevaluate after the campaign to see if they've increased as a pre and a post assessment. But it was pretty favorable that parents were reading with their children.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah.
The second question, do you have something?
I was just going to add to, I think it's also at the school level, having been there, it's about how you encourage families. The dynamic of even just, I don't want to get in trouble by my boss, of when I was in school, that a lot of homes were a two-parent home with one person most likely staying at home who had the ability and the time to be able to expose and talk and converse and go outside of the home and look at signs and read in the grocery store, et cetera. That isn't necessarily the case nowadays. So it is a huge part of the schools to help families understand that reading doesn't have to be sitting down looking at a book. It can be in the car as you're driving, and you're looking at the signs as you're going by. It can be in the grocery store, while you're picking out groceries and, what's listed on the box or the bag or whatever. That there are so many elements that families can do that sometimes they aren't aware that that's even part of reading, and exposing them to students to the language and the vocabulary of the world around them. But there is evidence that the household is quite different nowadays. Most parents are working parents, so that the time that they have to be able to provide that is not like it used to be. So schools have taken the added responsibility of how do we help share that, and how do we help support parents with what they do have. So.
Thank you. So the second question is, I guess, directed at Mr. Appleby.
He was feeling left out.
As we look at this program from Keene State, and you work with other higher ed institutions, is their program reflective of what's happening in other teacher preparation programs around the state?
Thank you for the question. I think Keene is an example of, probably, without inflating their egos too much, probably of an exemplar of what we would look for. And the other 11 programs, there's variations. They're good in some areas. They have work to do in other areas. And right, ultimately, there is always work to do to improve. But I think that, in the case of Keene, which is, I think, our second largest overall program in the state, it might be our largest now, but they would be what everyone should aspire to.
Thank you. I've got one third one here. So as we look at, one of the issues that this committee always has to deal with, and that is, as we pass and recommend legislation, is its impact upon local decisions. And granted, there are, as you have indicated, there are multiple approaches to looking at reading, whether it be phonetics, whether it be the open stuff you were talking about. So the question that I really have is do you feel that this particular piece of legislation, and we just have got an amendment here from Representative Cordelli this morning, but in general, do you view that a state mandate or a state law is needed to dictate a particular approach to reading, and how does that impact local decision-making as it relates to their review of their student population, et cetera, and the needs of that population?
I think with reading, you know, I'm a literacy person, so I definitely want all our teachers to be prepared and to engage and to prepare, you know, teach our students these skills. I think my one worry is, and I think it would be important to maybe talk to, you know, elementary school principals and teachers, is the workload implications. Is this added work? Do they have time? Because I know that schools are stretched thin as is. And so that's only with having the standardized testing, you know, I think it says here, 3 times a year, you know, how is that going to affect their ability to teach or to do the work that they need to do? And understanding too that a lot of schools now do a universal screening when they come in as kindergarten, because the goal is not to say we're identifying students who have learning disabilities, but to know where students are so that they know what to teach and what the students need, and to offer instruction that is differentiated for the population that's coming in. So I do think that having a standardized maybe at the end of kindergarten, I think at the kindergarten year, we have to allow the teachers to do what they are trained to do and really help students gain the skills that they may not have had before that. Maybe the use of informal versus standardized more often. But I think this is a conversation to really have with the teachers and to see what their days look like and what the impact it would be in their classrooms.
I'm not sure I got an answer to my question. Let me repeat it again.
Sure.
Does the state law need to take place to mandate an approach to reading vis-a-vis local decision-making reflecting of the students and the culture that they bring to school?
I don't think there's anything, I don't have anything against having a bill, just making sure a law for literacy. I just make sure, I mean, the areas are evidence-based, but making sure the language is flexible enough that it can change as evidence, you know, as the research continues to change, as schools continue to change. So it's supportive and something that can grow as you know, instead of being something that is time-stamped in a moment. Is that better? Yeah.
Can I reiterate that they already are screening twice a year,
Yes.
kindergarten through third, and you're just adding a mid-year or an end-of-the-year assessment.
Yeah.
Representative Ludo?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to follow up, Dr. Sturts, on Representative Myler's question, and really get specific in terms of what we need to do in New Hampshire. And Section 3 of the draft amendment that Representative Cordelli handed out, you know, establishes a mandate. All school districts which provide elementary education shall ... And it basically literacy instruction that shall be measurable, evidence-based, reflective of the science of reading research, and it goes down and I think enumerates what being reflective of the science of reading research is, and I want to sort of flash this up juxtaposed with some other department initiatives that would reduce or eliminate credentialing in a lot of areas. And I'd like to get your professional opinion on what's more important to have in front of early, you know, K-3 kids. Would it be more important to have a specific program that did something, and a guide that can sort of move a student through the program or cover the content of the program, or in your opinion, have a professionally trained instructor that has a background of knowledge in evidence-based practices, both in terms of content and instruction, and have that person in front of the child being able to recognize as you said earlier, the differences that kids exhibit.
Well, as somebody who, I'm also the licensure officer. I should just have like a long line of what I do. I always look at our candidates and say, would I want this teacher, would I feel comfortable with them teaching my own children? Right? And so I do believe that we need to have qualified, trained teachers in front of the classroom. I do, that are leading the work in literacy. And I think that will make the bigger impact in our schools than just having a program. And I think the problem with programs is that they never cover everything. It's just, it's a box that's brought in and somebody reads it, but there's so many nuances to teaching that box can't bring. And that's what qualified teachers do bring to a classroom. I don't think that, and that's where I said programs can be used where there's elements used to it. But I think if you want something that works in a classroom, it's not only having the qualified teachers, and you're talking K-3, but it's also preparing our tutors and paraprofessionals to also support the teacher and to support the learning in the classroom. So I think there's a tiered level of knowledge that needs to be in that classroom to really meet the needs of students.
I'm sorry, Erin. Yes,
Okay, I might be backtracking just a little, but what I was curious about is this. I'm on page 4 of the updated version 11, Roman numeral 11, about this report. It sounds like a specific report is being asked for about these programs based on the content of this bill. But what my question is before, Mr. Appleby, you were talking about basically how Keene State's doing a good job, and there's 11 other programs in the state. And I guess my question is, and this might just be my not being a newbie, not having read the whole Green Book of Laws, but are there other evaluations? How are the programs, these 12 then programs, being evaluated? Are there other reports? So this would be an additional report being asked for. Where else can you find information on the other programs, including?
Sure. So the programs are either reviewed by the state through a process under a state review, or they can receive national accreditation, and that gives them for their approval. And part of that is including the Ed Prep standards that are required in New Hampshire. And at the very beginning of our conversation today, I explained some of the work that we're doing now that we're hoping to roll out in the next 6 to 12 months are including specific standards relative to science of reading within our Ed Prep programs. And our administrative rules allow us to do that, to include, and then we'll have mechanisms in place that some of that will not only be how the institutions are demonstrating where that information is within their programs, but they report out on any changes in rules, et cetera, annually to the department.
I can just add to that. The administrative rules were recently updated by the state board and strengthened in this area. And there's more granularity now in the rules, which should make Laura's job a little easier when it comes to reviewing programs and presenting those findings to the State Board of Education. And additionally, you asked about where you could find this information. It is always included in the monthly State Board of Education packet. Any program reviews that have been completed are in those packets. Right? Good.
If I could just mention.
I would add to just one last, there is an annually published approval for the programs within the state of New Hampshire, and that is also available on the department website. And you'll see in there also if the institution has obtained full approval, conditional approval, meaning there are unmet standards that impact the program, and programs that are being eliminated or closed out.
I just wanted to mention that we did incorporate in here that the department would make available to the local districts guidance on appropriate instructional materials to help the districts in that regard. in terms of the assessments, beginning, middle, and end, and in between, I've talked to teachers who do it more frequently. And I actually attended a professional development session for teachers involved in reading and literacy. The presenter was an assistant superintendent from a district in Massachusetts who went over what they did. And they had extensive data collected from these assessments for each student that the teachers and others put into spreadsheets to track student progress. I'm hoping we wouldn't have to do that. I believe there are products out there that will do much of that based on the assessment. This is just one because I was mostly familiar with that. I've got just a couple of handouts, but I can mail it around. This is the company that does the Dibble assessment. And they capture data from that assessment and help build interventions, and some of the data that the people in Massachusetts are trying to have the teachers put into spreadsheets. That's done automatically for them, in addition to having a parent portal. So I would hope that we could move in the direction of a system like that will have an automated component to help teachers track that information rather than being a data entry person. I was also, feedback was mentioned, I think, by Representative Luno. And I was wondering if you've gotten feedback from students who have graduated and gone into the classroom. And I've heard stories of, and you've reiterated, teachers, learning from what you've taught at Keene State, but then maybe finding something different in a program at the elementary school where they have been hired. Do you get feedback from graduating students on what they're experiencing in the field?
Yes, and we go through a CAPE National accreditation, and one of the requirements for our CAPE National accreditation is that we have to, for Standard 4, is follow up on our completers to evaluate the effectiveness of our programs and their satisfaction of our programs. And there's also an outreach to our graduates to do focus groups to ask about changes they would make, and to their employers who have hired our graduates. So that is data that we have to collect and we actually use for our continuous improvement. And literacy has not, it was years ago when we made the changes, was one of the things that some of our candidates said that they wish they had more preparation. And that's how we responded, as we created a class that really added a whole nother level of literacy before they entered methods. So that was one of the things that we used in response to the feedback we got from not only our alum, but we also have what's called an Educator Preparation Advisory Council that has a couple of us, but it has cooperating professionals that we work with. It has principals, it has superintendents, so it has people in the field so that we get their feedback as well when we're making decisions. So we do use that feedback. The feedback in our last round for our CAPE accreditation, most of them felt more prepared in the area of literacy. The continuous thing that people always want more of is classroom management, the behaviors that are in the classroom. So,
Thank you. Yes, Representative Cornell.
I did have a question about on number 5, the certification renewal. It's to get your renewal, you shall have passed a subject assessment test. I just was wondering who would make up that subject assessment test that teachers would have to take prior to being, and I guess
Tell us
it's
what
new
page
to
you're
me
on.
that
I'm sorry.
at the end, number
Sorry. RSA.
yeah. right at the bottom of the page, RSA 189. Yeah. I guess and it just I may be out of touch for a while, but I haven't heard of educators having to take a test to get their recertification in a long time or ever. And who would make up that test?
Yes.
It's hard enough to get, I think, all the credits in the different areas that you have to get them in without making a teacher
Right.
take a test every 3 years.
Well, so currently, to obtain your initial license in elementary ed K-6, elementary ed K-8, early childhood ed, reading, writing teacher, and reading, writing specialist, a candidate has to pass the Foundations of Reading exam, which Pearson produces. And this is the exam we spoke about earlier that follows the evidence-based research. So if I understand correctly, what's in the proposal is that while current initial license seekers have to pass that test, we have thousands of individuals statewide in positions who predate that testing requirement, which the state board put in place about 2015, I believe. So prior to that, educators did not need to take that test as part of initial licensure. So what we have is a significantly large workforce currently in the field, which has never taken that test and therefore, may not have received training, the most up-to-date training in this area. So as I understand in my read of this, it is that in order to renew a license, an educator would have to show proof of passing this exam. Once, not every 3 years. Because we don't, when folks apply for a license, they apply for an elementary ed K-6 license and they pass their tests. If they then later apply for another endorsement on that license, we don't make them retake the test.
Okay. I don't think it's clear that it's not every 3 years that they have to take the test. And
Well,
it doesn't state that there will be training for those people to make sure that they pass it. And it also said shall have passed a subject assessment test. So it's not really
That's-
clear what
right.
test.
Yeah, the intent.
clear.
Yeah, the intent was what Mr. Appleby described. And I did not want to specify a specific name of a test like the Foundations of Reading in there. So I just used the subject assessment test language. But shall have passed an assessment test, to my way of thinking, says once. It doesn't require it every time you recertify.
our advice is always that we not put specific names, whether they be tests or testing companies, into statute or even administrative rule if possible, because things change. And then all of a sudden, we're out of sync with, so there's a little bit of vagueness sometimes in administrative rule as well around a test. Because again, if we say an exact name and then the company changes that name, now we have a problem, so.
Thank you.
So thanks, Mr. Chair. And Representative Cornell's question, I think, is a very important one. Certainly, there are, teachers who have been teaching for quite some time. There's new teachers entering the field right now, and I think I'll probably wait and ask this question to maybe I see Deb Howes back there. I know professional development is something that's very important to her and to all teachers and people around this table. I was on a Hobden School Board for 12 years, so I certainly recognize the number of PD days and in-service days that we have, and I think several of them every year are very well organized through our teacher organizations. And I'd be interested in maybe learning a little bit more about these sort of continuing education training programs. But rather than belaboring that, I wanted to get back to the bill, House Bill 437, and there's a lot packed into this, and just sort of going through the sections, breaking them out. individually, there's a section on assessment, on instruction, on reporting, on curriculum and instructional mandates, on dyslexia screening, and then on certificate renewal. And I think they're all I think they're all related to what Representative Cordelli is proposing here. But I'm trying to sort of understand what might give us the strongest impact to improve literacy, for our kids, and leverage the the professional instructional practices that we have, in our schools today, that get the best out of the continuing education that all school districts, perform, without having a certain one-size-fits-all thing jammed down their throats. And I have received some email from parents who really appreciate the attention on early dyslexia screening. And it sounds like from Kate McCafferty that we're doing assessment right now, and that this would add a mid or end, a third assessment. So I don't know if currently we've got reading assessment in statute, because it says here in section 1 that it's a new section. So what do we need from this bill and to leverage the best of what we have in place now?
I can speak to the 3 times a year. So typically you want to assess at the beginning of the year to gauge where the students are. A midway through the year to see that your supplements or whatever you've done for RTI or MTSS are working. And then an end of the year. And the end of the year is really powerful because when the kids come back in the summer, it's very telling. Where they lose ground this summer, where have they come back in? Where did they leave? So typically you want to do 3 times a year to really get quality assessment. And data speaks for itself. Data is supposed to help the teachers guide the instruction, right? So teachers need to understand the data, and they need to be able to understand the different assessment tools that are available, and to be able to use the tools in their toolbox to help the children in front of them. Yeah. So it really sheds light on the need. And that's really typically why we do 3 in best practices.
So is that, and this is a work session, so I apologize for it getting a little loose. So is that what is spelled out, what you just talked about? Is that what's in Roman 1 and Roman 2?
Yes.
In the first part of this bill?
Correct. Understanding that it would be 3 times versus the other dyslexia legislation, which is only done 2 times. And then the difference between this one is there's no secondary assessment. So in the current dyslexia legislation, there is an assessment, and then there's a secondary assessment to triangulate the data. So that's just a little bit of the difference between the 2.
All right. So if we can hop down to it's the 3rd page, but it's on the inside, not on the back, where we've got section 4, screening and intervention for dyslexia. Is that building upon what's being done right now?
Yes. So the idea is to screen students. The screener will indicate a flag of risk. Then the teachers will create an intervention plan, which was what the current legislation had, which is pretty much MTSS or RTI.
Okay.
And make a plan for the students according to the data.
Okay. And that's section 4 of the bill.
Yes.
Okay. So those are the parts that of this bill that I think are in the assessment category. And those, it sound like, make sense to you as improvements. Yes.
Yes, I mean, 3 times a year we'll
Yep.
get that idea. Yes.
I think changing the language from a standardized assessment to screeners is a different level of assessment and engagement in the class, and it gives a little more flexibility to the teachers to use what they're using in the classroom. It's kind of what they're doing now.
And so is that what this is doing? It changes it from assessment to screeners?
Well, the other law said that it had to be an evidence-based screener for dyslexia,
Yeah.
which means it had to be valid and reliable and has data that it would show nationally a risk, right? So if you're talking about a valid and reliable screener, it's gone through a peer review process. It's gone through multiple rounds of data collection to become a valid dyslexia screener. An assessment and a screener are different. So a reading assessment can be an informal assessment. It could be another tool in the toolbox. A CTOP is technically an assessment, but it can get into other areas. So there's the 2 tweaks on those different terms.
So can I just keep sort of pounding on this a little bit? So in section 4, where we talk about the screening and intervention for dyslexia, is that improving upon the existing law, changing the existing law? I think Arlene said we're not experts at everything in the manual, so it
beginning-
really helps to have.
Number 1 is the same. So number 1 is the same because it says that all students shall be screened, including English language learners, using an approved, now it says universal reading screener instead of an evidence-based reading screener. So there's a difference there. And to identify the potential risks for dyslexia. So that is the same. The second part,
Well, it's not the same, because you just said.
There's no
It
evidence-based.
changes evidence-based to approved universal reading screener, which is the approved, the screener that's approved by the Board of Education and not selected by the local school district as an evidence-based.
yeah.
So what would be better to have? A universal one or an evidence-based one?
An evidence-based shows that there's reliability and validity to the findings when you use that type of a screener.
So would it be better not to change RSA 200:59, replacing evidence-based with universal, with approved universal?
Depends on who's approving the universal screener.
Right,
Yeah.
Yeah, the intent was that it would match Roman 1 on the first page.
Right. And Roman 1 on the first page is a new section as opposed to a repeal and replace, which is what's in section 4. And so would it be fair then to, the screener shall be, I mean, should the screener in, I'm sorry I'm bouncing back between section 1 and section 4, but if evidence-based, if being selected by a trained professional who's following the law to select an evidence-based screener, would that be better language in section 1 and section 4 than deferring to the department to approve a universal screening technology?
Well, it might allow, I mean, if the DOE is gonna publish, like, these are evidence-based screeners, it gives like options for the schools to use, but still allows them to do evidence-based, which they would select anyways.
But they have to then turn in the results, and each screener is different. So you want to compare apples to apples versus apples and oranges, right? Each screener has its strengths and its weakness, which were part of the guidance documents that our dyslexic committee this summer met, and we went through evidence-based screeners for the other pending law. And so each one has its strengths and weaknesses. And I guess from that point on, it's really we want the data to guide the instruction, right? And we want to see how to help the kids. So we need to have something, if you're going to have the evidence, if you're going to report, it should be apples to apples.
So in section 1, Roman 1, it talks about how the Department of Education shall identify and contract for a measurable evidence-based universal reading screener. And so this isn't a list of screeners. This is a contract enacted through the department.
Right. The intent was, as was mentioned, an apples to apples provision in this for several reasons. We want to have a common base between districts in terms of screening and deficiencies and results. Plus, if we are going to give out or make available grants, I think that they have to be based on a common set of criteria and a common measure. If the grant process is going to have any validity.
Well, I mean, currently the state provides adequate education grants to school districts to develop and provide instruction as determined by the local school district. So, I mean, it's not uniform. It's not a uniform product in every school district. It's reflective of the school boards and the administration and the teachers and the interests of the teachers and the parents and the kids in these districts. So then we still provide adequate education grants.
Right.
Without-
They are based on attendance.
Right.
But on this, we're making this available to students where they have reading deficiencies. And if we're going to use that, I think there has to be an apples to apples basis. And because we're not doing this in budget year, we've changed from a formal grant based on those numbers to a competitive grant program, just because of the funding issue.
So a competitive grant program so that some districts would receive a grant for screening for dyslexia and other districts wouldn't receive a grant?
Correct. It's a competitive process. And it's not just for dyslexia, it's for literacy in general.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right.
Right.
So I like what I'm hearing in terms of, screening 3 times a year in these early elementary grades. That makes a sense. Adding a new section where we didn't have a section requiring, there's no section requiring screening at all right now, right? Because this is a new section.
2 times a year
So we're
For
not
dyslexia.
for
Right.
dyslexia.
for dyslexia, but this screens for literacy 3 times a year. Dyslexia and
Correct.
Right.
So I guess what I'm saying, Mr. Chair, I guess I'm saying is, I think what you're offering here there's some very good pieces in here. I think some of it maybe goes too far by requiring a certain tool for assessment. As opposed to allowing the district to choose from different screening tools that may provide different, you said they have trade-offs, the different screening. I mean, I'm not an expert in this area.
Yes,
So-
it's on the New Hampshire guidance on the Department of Ed's website, where we went and we reviewed it for 10 areas, phonemic awareness, phonics, encoding. And so there's trade-offs with different assessment tools.
So could it be, and again, apologies for being loose, could it be that 1 or 2 different screening tools might be really appropriate for Concord, but some other screening tools might be really appropriate for Newport?
If I could answer, the intent was for the 3 times a year with the saying you cannot use any other screener in the meantime, because I've talked to reading specialists who do assessing with screeners much more often than 3 times a year. And if they want to use a different screener, maybe for specific students to look at specific deficiencies, that's well within their purview. And I certainly don't want to block any further assessment along those lines.
Glenn, I think that's really helpful. Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that. Maybe we want to put some sort of language like that in there that reaffirms the local school district's ability to select screeners to to meet their needs.
Screeners.
So I think that helps out a lot. That's assessment.
One more piece I wanted to touch on with assessment. We have Dr. Green here because one other thing we wanted to talk about was and talking about screeners versus assessment. We've got the 3rd grade assessment for English language arts, and we wanted to talk about how that is aligned and how that plays into this as well. I think that was something you brought up, Representative Myler, last time. So, we have Dr. Green here to address that component as
Okay,
well.
well, so if I may, Mr. Chair, this is the last work session we're having on 437?
If you feel it necessary to have another one.
I mean, we might, if we,
Because I won't mention one more thing. We have been working with Dr. Carol Tolman, who is one of the authors of the Letters Program
okay,
and happens to live here in New Hampshire. And we've been working with her, and we have another meeting with her on the 26th of this month
okay.
for what we thought might be a final review of the legislation.
Oh, maybe we should have so
We could do another review after we have that discussion
I
with her.
I think that would be great. So if I might suggest though, so that we can get through this very meaty and very technical bill that affects how all of our kids learn, if we could go down through each of the components: assessment, interventions, reporting, curriculum and instruction mandates. The dyslexia screen was part of assessment, and then the certification renewal, profession development, and trainings.
At the next session. we can
Yeah, but
section by
go through section by section and
Yeah, we can do that.
and sort of efficiently be able to see what we need to do with this.
So we'll schedule something for early November.
I think Rick's here right now, so.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
First of all, this is such an important topic. We all want our kiddos to be able to read appropriately, and I want to thank Glenn for bringing this forward to us. I'm way out of my comfort zone here, and I mean, I'm sitting here. I'm trying to think about, well, how did I learn how to read? And although at my age, my memory is not as good as it used to be, but I can remember Mr. Levine in my 4th grade putting on my desk the book Backboard Magic, because he knew I wasn't reading very much, and he knew I liked basketball, and so it was Backboard Magic that basically made me a lifelong reader. So I thank him for that. And so the question I guess I have, we've heard the term the science of reading. Is that so the question I have, is that a generic term, or is that a dicta for reading? So that's one question. The other question that I have is that on it would be section 5, 3I. Glenn, you list the issue of home awareness, letters of knowledge, understanding alphabetic principles, morphology, I've never heard that term before, semantics, syntax, how do all those issues fit in to learning of reading and the actual training of teachers in these components? So there really are two questions. One, is the science of reading a dicta, a particular philosophy of reading, or is it just a generic term? And then the second piece are these component parts that you've listed here. Does that cover everything, or is that a particular approach to reading? Because I don't understand how these all, I'm assuming they all fit together in some way, but I don't know whether or not that's a program or whatever. So if you could
So-
just clarify it for me.
Yeah, so the science of reading is a methodology. It's a methodology in looking at the data, but also looking at what has been evidence-based for the neuroscience in reading. So you can go back to the 80s, you can go back to the national panel where they reviewed literature for what is an evidence-based program, which that means I can take this program and I can move it to different schools and I will get the similar results. It's valid, it's reliable, it's been peer reviewed, and it has a clear methodology. So it isn't really a program, it is a method of understanding data and understanding how children learn to read. And the areas that you mentioned are considered evidence-based, how we learn to read. We learn with semantics, we learn with phonology, we learn with our letter and sounds. And so there's a lot of neuroscience going all the way back to Shally Shaywitz, back to the national panel, and really looking at how do we best teach children to read. And so that is the science of reading now. People call it different terms. Some states call it evidence-based practices. It's really looking at what is working in schools and what is working. They have sometimes 5 decades of research, right? So it's really looking at research from different views. Does it have evidence? Is it reliable? And is it valid?
Thank you. So how does that differ from what's currently being done?
What's currently what?
Being done in schools.
It depends.
It depends. It
think-
depends.
I think what's different is that a lot of people, when the National Reading Panel came out, there was a call for systematic, explicit phonemic instruction, and phonic instruction. And I think some teachers, they wanted to go for more of a balanced literacy approach, where it wasn't just the phonics that was clear in there, but, we also want to do all these things because we also want to inspire students to read. But I think through that, the balance became unbalanced. And I think that's what's happening, is that there is a want to inspire students to read, but sometimes the skills or knowledge to teach phonics is really something you have to learn and be comfortable with to be able to teach the next generation. So I think it is happening, maybe not as balanced as it should, in the levels it should be, but I think that there has been a lot of shift towards it. And to be honest, some of the programs that schools are using, it is not as evidence-based, or not all the components of it are really aligned with the science of reading.
So, thank you for that clarification. So, but wouldn't you also agree that some students learn differently? In other words, some could use the whole language approach, for example, vis-a-vis that of a phonetic approach. So how does that, the variance of how students learn, how does that fit into the, quote, evidence-based approach?
So they're really looking at the neuroscience and understanding how children learn to read. So for instance, we know that the dyslexic children are running on the frontal cortex. And if we give them an evidence-based program, we actually see the other areas of the brain begin to light up that were at deficit. So what we know from fMRI imaging and from the research being done with children who go under brain scans is that when you give evidence-based instruction in the orthographic processing area of the brain begins to activate. So that is what the research says. In regards to teaching phonology, it won't harm any child if you teach phonics for any child in the classroom.
Well, and my students, when they ask me why, I say when we teach phonemic awareness and phonics, right, through the sound and decoding, one sound, teaching them one phoneme allows them to learn and be able to say hundreds of words. If we do whole language and we teach one word, they learn one word.
Thank you.
And I read it, we also in work conference I was at on Seacoast, and this was handout right the last time about the reading brain and how the different lobes, the areas of the brain work together in terms of understanding reading, but it also talks about the difference with dyslexia.
Yeah.
And it's a different process, different way the brain works when there's issues with dyslexia.
Yeah.
1 in 5. So before we move on to our next set of bills, I did want to, if we could call up Dr. Green and talk about third grade assessment.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Good morning. Apologize for the appearance today in jeans and a polo. I just got back from Colorado and spending the rest of the day getting ready for a conference and moving furniture at the department, so a little more casual today.
I hope you had a good time in Colorado.
It was good, yeah.
Good. So one of the questions that was raised last subcommittee meeting was about the third grade assessment. And if we are moving in the direction of the evidence-based science of reading research based instruction, how does that play with the third grade assessment that is being given to students for English language arts?
I think it plays really well because third grade state assessments begin and really look at what students have learned by the end of third grade. It's sort of, do students have the skills necessary to move into that fourth grade? It's the first state assessment that we're giving. When we talk about the science of reading and a lot of the literacy assessments that have been talked about today, that's assessments and building skills for students in the K, first, second, third grade, and measuring students' progress up to the point where the state assessment will be given. So that's going to build all those foundational skills that then theoretically would transfer to student performance on the state assessment. The assessment itself isn't necessarily built for a K to 2 level set of skills and frameworks, but I think everything talked about with this bill builds the skills necessary for students to be successful on the current state assessment.
So there would have to be no changes made in terms of the questions that are being asked on the assessment with, let's say, the passage of this bill.
No, I don't think we'd have to make any changes to the current state assessment.
Further questions for Dr. Green? Great. Thank you very much, and we'll let you go back to moving that furniture around.
Thank you.
Anything else from the subcommittee? We have 2 minutes. Does anyone in the audience care to make a, yes?
Good morning, I'm Brenda Peters. I'm here on behalf of the International Dyslexia Association, Northern New England Alliance, representing Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. I do have some comments about the Institutes of Higher Education and teacher preparation programs. I am very concerned about that because as a reading specialist and a learning disability specialist, I was never required to teach a child to read. Like, let that sink in. As a master's degree in reading, as a reading specialist and learning disability specialist, I never had to teach a child to read, and I didn't know how. I had to go outside of the school systems, the higher education system, to get the training in structured literacy, which the pillars of language are based upon, in order to teach a child to read. So I believe all teachers should have the experience, the knowledge, and the ability to teach children to read, especially those who are specialists. So there was a comment made that about balanced literacy and that teachers want to teach balanced literacy. They don't want to teach balanced literacy. They want to teach kids to read, and we won't be able to do that with balanced literacy. We need to be able to teach that 65% of our kids in the classroom are 1 or more years below grade level in reading. So it's starting out with our teacher preparation programs. We need our elementary educators to be able to walk into a classroom, take all that great background knowledge they have and apply it. And 1 hour of observation of them teaching a reading lesson is not sufficient. These teachers need to have practice and experience. And I keep going back to driver's ed. Imagine taking driver's ed and doing just the classroom portion, but never driving the car. That's what's happening in our education system. These teachers need to be in and working one-on-one with a student to see, how does phonemic awareness work? How does phonics work? How do I pull together semantics and syntax and comprehension all into a lesson? I know how to do that. I learned it outside of the school system. It helped me pull together all that background knowledge I got and apply it. We need to be specialists in application and implementation. And right now we have a huge disconnect. And I went to a private school, so I didn't go to a state school, but I have trained many of our teachers that came out of the state schools, even as reading specialists, who did not know how to teach a child to read, including those who struggle. So yes, 1/3 of the population will learn no matter what, despite what we give them, but the other 2/3 need to have this direct, systematic approach to instruction. Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Peters? No? Seeing none, thank you very much
You're so
for being here. And with that, I guess we'll end today's subcommittee meeting, and we'll schedule one for the beginning of November, allowing us to hopefully get something drafted for our final meeting on November 13th, which will be when the full committee will vote on this legislation. So you can come back a few more times if you'd like. Thank you very much.
With the next set of bills which we have on our docket. Okay, we're going to be jumping around with these bills a little bit here. The first bill which I'd like to take up this morning, and these are all 6 retained bills for the Committee of the Whole. The first bill I'd like to address as Mr. Appleby has to be out of here, and he has information for us on HB 155. And as we discussed this at the previous meeting which we had on these bills back on October 5, we had discussed the need to get some clarification from Mr. Appleby regarding where we go with all the 2 parts in this legislation. This is a bill dealing with the relative to the Division of Educator Support in Higher Education and relative to surety indemnification for private post-secondary career schools. The first part of the bill dealt with the makeup of the Higher Education Commission, and the second part dealt with the surety. Steve, I think we were concerned with the latter part with the surety. Indemnification. Can you please explain to us why that is or isn't or can be developed later or what have you?
Thank you, Chair Ladd. Steve Appleby, Director of Educator Support and Higher Education at the Department of Ed. At this time, I would recommend not moving forward with the surety indemnification piece. I have some calls out to some career school owners who are interested in this change. However, due to scheduling and timing, getting them here is they run businesses and schools, so it's not always easy to get them here. So I would recommend we put this off till the next session next year, and we just look at the makeup of the Higher Ed Commission, which is really much more of a practical issue when we hold Higher Ed Commission meetings. As I mentioned, I think back on October 5th, there was another bill that also had this Higher Ed Commission piece in it. Some of the areas that we run into problems on the commission is we don't have the opportunity for designees for several of the positions, like the chancellors. We have a seat that we've had for years for a for-profit college representative. We no longer have any for-profit colleges in our state. They're all gone. So that seat perpetually sits open. And based on the national landscape right now in higher ed, we don't anticipate there being a for-profit college in our state anytime in the near future. And we can always come back and ask that it be re-added back. So that's really, this is, the commission is more of a housekeeping measure to clean up some past, relics of the past, so to speak.
And what we have today may be relics in the future, seeing that I think the community college system meets tomorrow.
We do, yes.
And the university system meets tomorrow.
Correct.
And looking at structuring the system-wide governance.
So we may come back again with another.
We may come back, but okay, are there further questions here from the group regarding this bill? Yes, Representative Leno.
Sure. So just to review the bidding here, it would be to, I'm just looking at the bill. Where's the surety part?
That's on page 2 at the end on line 31.
Section 2.
Yeah.
So it would be, what your recommendation, Mr. Appleby, is to drop section 2.
Yes.
And section 1 is a...
You also recommended the commission may instead of shall.
Correct. And that was with regard to the grant question. We don't have a record of the commission ever pursuing a grant as a commission. We look back, I started on the commission, I was on from 2007 to 2017 as a commissioner. And so going back to 2007, the commission has not pursued a grant. We could research that further back. That would take staff time and some hours, but changing that word from shall, which is fairly rigid and open-ended, what grant, what type of grant,
Do you have
after all
a copy of
grades.
the bill in front of you, Steve?
I don't.
Here, let me give you the
Thank you.
copy right here, so I know you gotta run, and if there's anything else that you see within it.
Isn't it actually dropping the apply for, accept, and expend state, federal, and other grants?
Why don't you just go right from page 1 down through the membership there, and we had some discussion on all those items, and just tell us from your perspective as the director of higher ed, where we should go.
Thank you. Okay, so part 2, which is there's hereby established a higher education commission, which consists of the following members. The suggestion is to add designees to the chancellor of the community college system. And you see now this bill should also add designee under number 3, chancellor of the university system, which I believe the other bill has that language. There are 2 bills that are very similar. So we would want, we were hoping to see a designee for number 3 for the chancellor of USNH, a designee for number 4, which is the chancellor of CCSNH, and a designee for number 5, which is the commissioner of the Department of Education. The next change was number 7, and that was the removal of the for-profit college. As I mentioned, there aren't any for-profit colleges currently in our state and have not been for 7 years. And then the next suggested change would be at the top of page 2, line 1. Line 1,
That's the shall to may.
really.
Mine's still shall.
No, we want to leave number 1 as shall.
Okay,
However, where is it? Number 4,
Line 8 goes away.
line 8 would go away, right? That would be the suggestion. Or change that to may apply. Because up top, we say shall, which then implies in number 4, we shall do that.
oh, yeah.
Did you see what I'm saying there? So we either want to take out line 8 altogether or add the word may in there somewhere so that we have the option. And then the rest up until, and then we would drop surety indemnification.
It's just renumbering, yeah.
Are there any other areas, and section 2, of course, is then taken out of the bill. Any other questions of Mr. Appleby at this time?
So Rick?
Yeah.
Yeah, just, so I know when we had the hearing, I asked about this question, when it comes to state, federal, and other grants. And you said nothing's happened for a long time on that. What possibly could the Higher Education Commission do with state, federal, or other grants?
I don't have an answer, Representative.
So
Can I just provide, maybe it's entirely possible, and I could try and do some research on this. It is entirely possible that this is holdover language from when the Office of Post-Secondary Education existed prior to 2011. In 2011, the Office of Post-Secondary Education was folded into the Department of Education. But when it was a standalone entity, it also administered a number of financial aid programs. It had other duties. And the commission was different back then. They had a much larger purview. They were much deeper into program approval in our institutions. And I know that office applied for grants at the time. And so that language may be a holdover from that time.
Right. So just asking the question though, if we struck line 8, which is the number 4, apply, accept, and the Higher Education Commission, for whatever reason down the road, wanted to apply for a grant, not having it in there wouldn't bar it from doing that, right?
No, and in fact, what I would say is the more likely they would find a grant and they would instruct my office to apply as the department.
Yeah. Okay.
Because they don't have staff,
There you go.
right? So they would instruct my team to apply, my team of 1, and we would apply for that grant.
Your
So
team of
1.5. 1.5.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other questions on this bill? I think we have it nailed down so we can make an amendment and go forward with what we've heard today. Any doubts on that? Okay, thank you very much. You may
Thank you. One away.
go on to your business. Yeah, I'd like to have that back. Okay, looking at the docket as it's presented on the board outside, the first bill on there was HB 354. Thank you very much, Steve. And good luck tomorrow. 354. This is the bill that it dealt with the charter schools receiving school building aid. And I do have today, and there was an amendment which came out at the last meeting. It was 2308H. And I have amending language here to that amendment. So I'm going to pass this around so everybody has a copy so we can. Thank you, Christine. I can quickly tell you what I did from what we had in the previous amendment. I have on lines 25 and 30 deleted that section where if a charter school were to go through the process of dissolution, but they first have to have a surety bond up front, less depreciation. What I've done is on 2A above on line 21 and 22, any charter public school to be improved or constructed using school building aid shall be owned by the charter public school, and in the event of a voluntary or involuntary dissolution shall be subject to the plan for disposition of the charter public school's assets pursuant to RSA as approved by the State Board of Education. And then if you look down at part 3 on the bottom of that page, that was in the amendment the other day. It's just language which is in place already for all public schools, but charter schools been added to it and incorporated into this legislation. So if they have a school that does dissolve or due to an involuntary or voluntary dissolution, and they have this in their charter or their plan for disposition, then if it's within the 20-year period, they have to pay back what the public schools are having to pay back. That's that process. The business about the surety bond, because they're receiving their funding in a different pattern and way than the school districts where they get 80% up front, 20% of the state allocation amount at the beginning of the project. This formula for the charter schools is different. And you can see that's been laid out. They get 30%, but that's a 5% each year thereafter over the course of the 20 years. So it's different. And with that understanding, I believe that this does cover the liability that the state may have. The other change on this amendment is really, there's no other change, but there were two changes that were put in this as a result of the dissolution commission that myself and Representative Cordelli and Representative Fellows participated in. And that's on the last page, on page 6. These two sections under 5 were in, where you'll have 5Z there, and under 6, Roman 9. That's in the amendment that we proposed back on the 5th of October on 2308H. So what this amendment does, only amends that language on the first page, or deletes that section on the first page. Everything else remains the same. Open for discussion. Representative Woodcock.
Thank you, Chairman Glad. Just a clarification, if I may. On the first page, where you're talking about in line 33 about the repayment that may be waived in line 35 by the Department of Education, is that the same repayment you're talking about on the last page in the new bullet print? So basically, the charter school could be free and exempt from any repayment. Is that, am I reading that correctly?
As any public school that has something happen within that 20-year period.
Right.
And they close the school down or it burns or emergency, the commissioner has that authority already for the public schools, regular public schools, to say you don't owe back to the state. That same language is applicable to the charter schools. Same language.
Thank you.
And they would pay back only that amount which they've received, which
Right.
would be, and so theirs is strung over a whole lot. It's not like it's all up front with the public school, which gets that 80 and 20.
Correct, right.
This is strung out over a period of years.
But those, if I'm, one follow-up, Mr. Chair?
Yeah,
So just to be clear, those two pieces, those two sections then would basically eliminate any requirement for repayment based on the commissioner's decision.
yes,
Okay.
that's right.
Thank you.
Forgiveness.
Pardon me?
There'd be forgiveness.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, as we have in law right now.
Right.
Yeah,
What's that?
that's in law right now.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, Representative Cornell, you had your hand up? No.
Yeah, thank you. Just on the first page, that's a loan forgiveness if there is some kind of disastrous situation at the school. Whereas the last page, section 5, really came up as a result of the dissolution commission that Chairman Ladd discussed. And in those meetings, we had the department there talking about dissolution, as well as the Division of Charitable Trusts from the Department of Justice, who are heavily involved because charter schools are non-public and so have a reporting requirement to the charitable trusts. And the charitable trust gets involved if there's any dissolution of a charter school through the bankruptcy process. So this section 5 plays into those meetings and those discussions with the Department of Justice.
Well, and just a little follow-up to what Glenn just mentioned is that any other assets which the charter school may owe on, or there may be debt, the state, by that sentence right there, is not going to be held liable for something that the charter school has incurred. This language in this bill is trying to address only the obligation to pay back the school building aid. But the study committee, which had senators and / representatives on it, agreed we didn't want to be held accountable for any other assets. That's done through the other organizations that Glenn has just spoken to, but the state doesn't want to have that debt passed down to the state. Yeah.
So thanks, Rick. I mean, I'd certainly like to hear more from the director of the Charitable Trust Division with respect to how the liabilities incurred by a 501c3 would somehow accrue to the state. I'm finding a little preposterous, but I think that what you've got here in section 5 has really nothing to do with the building aid program, but with the charter school, the section of law that establishes charter schools, not for building aid. But my question really goes more to the building aid, and you've certainly got voluntary and involuntary dissolution in here in several places. But how many New Hampshire charters have dissolved so far?
Yeah. Tal, do you have the answer to that one? Yeah.
Are we talking since the start?
Since the start, yeah. Yeah. And I guess to be fair, when considering that, it would be also good to know how many public school districts have dissolved so far through voluntary or involuntary dissolution and stranded assets.
Well, I doubt if we have a whole lot of public schools have done that. We may have one that went to a conversion school.
Right. But you've got you've got, I mean, those are taxpayer owned as opposed to 501c3s.
Right, exactly.
So,
See, what this does, it says that this has to be written into that plan for disposition of the charter school. That's not in law right now. And what we're doing here is on page 1, lines 20 through 24, saying your plan, when you put these charter schools together, the agreements, the charters, shall have a plan for disposition of the charter public schools assets. So they're not going to get building aid unless there is such a plan in place.
but it's not saying in 2A that the plan in 194B:3 has to include restoring, making the state whole. It just says that will be subject to the plan for disposition. It doesn't say that it has to be in B:3. And while we're looking up at the number of charters that have gone through dissolution processes, it would probably be good to know how many did so on a voluntary basis and how many did so through bankruptcy, which is, through involuntary process. Well, both can be bankruptcies, but in both cases, both voluntary and involuntary, were any assets recovered that were distributed to creditors? And where would the state be? And if this were to be, would the state be subordinate to other creditors, or would the state have a perfected interest in all assets, not just the building assets?
You put something in with the other bill, didn't you?
Well, we of course, when we had the committee study with the dissolution people, and working with charitable trusts and the director, the issue that came up with is that the way to deal with that and do it quickly was they're aware we had this other bill dealing with school building aid for charter schools, which also within that there is reference to that in the as far as if it's dissolved or the dissolution of process is there. So it was for I guess expediting that process. That's why it was attached into this right here, so that it could be really clarified. That really has, are you talking about other assets beyond what has come in as the state has contributed for building aid?
Sure. I mean, every, an organization can have, building, land and building are primary assets of a lot of organizations. And there's going to be other assets. There could be other assets too, like money in a bank account, something like that. So I guess the question would be if a charter with such assets was going through voluntary or involuntary dissolution, why would be the first question, and what would happen to those assets? And in most cases, particularly if they had taken out a mortgage, let's say, to construct a facility, and I may be getting, is the mortgage holder the bank? Yeah, the mortgage holder would be listed as the number one creditor. And they would be made whole before any other creditors would be made whole. And other creditors could be, could be Staples, could be someone that provides, cereals and stuff like that.
There's a pecking order.
Yeah. But the number one in the pecking order is going to be the bank.
What we're trying to say is that we don't want to come down where all the revenue or all those assets are used up and there's still debt. And the state doesn't want to be held liable for any of that.
The state doesn't want to be holding the bag.
That's right.
And for the most part, and again, this is beyond my expertise, but the first creditor, the primary creditor with the perfected security interest in the assets may not even be made whole in a bankruptcy.
Yep.
And so you don't even get to number 2. You don't even get to WDB Mason and Staples and Best Buy and Amazon and credit cards and all these other things.
Yeah, I've been through that with the Water Commission where I was a commissioner, and there was a lot owed to the Water Commission for bills that had not been paid and for piping and all that. We were way down the list. We never got reimbursed for that. We had to eat it. We had to write it off.
That was for a private business who was a
Well, that was
water
for a
customer.
private business that had a trailer park
Right, that were
and
customers.
owned
of
all the
water.
trailers, but, some of the renters were not paying their bills, et cetera, so it just slops down.
yep.
And we, as a water district, got caught with that. And so, but on this particular situation here, this is an area, we worked with a charitable trust, and it does not necessarily have to be in this bill. If we see that this language needs further work somehow, I'm good with that, because it has nothing to do with, the other portion's already taken care of on the front page in terms of the state monies for building aid.
So I guess what I'm asking, Rick, is why would we be considering putting the state in a subordinate position to other debt in order to provide building aid, essentially invest in the construction of a charter school, when we've got a $250 million backlog of public schools looking for building aid that we haven't been able to address in the last decade? And why would the state be taking putting its assets at risk when we know when we invest in the construction of public schools, the assets are used and there's no risk of dissolution?
I don't think.
I mean, I don't understand why.
Yeah, I don't think we necessarily are. Per the charitable trusts, as I recall, Chairman, they are involved, the Department of Justice is involved in any such case. And each of those nonprofit charter schools is required to file paperwork with the charitable trusts. And that includes a more comprehensive dissolution agreement than is in the charter school application. Charter school applications are required to have a dissolution agreement as well, but they're the director there can
It also
correct me if I'm
requires
wrong,
them to
but
have
they're
an
pretty
annual
generic.
audit. That's sent to the
right.
charitable trust.
Sure. No, I understand all that, but I guess it would be good to hear what is required by statute to be in the dissolution agreement, and to what extent does the Department of Justice Charitable Trust Division get involved during a dissolution case? My understanding is charitable trust gets involved when you see nonprofit mergers among hospitals, because there's obviously lots of assets involved here. It's not a dissolution situation, but oftentimes, and maybe more often than not, a dissolution is a result of inability to for an organization to meet its obligations, and the charitable trust division isn't going to be in a position where it needs to establish a charitable remainder trust as a result of a zero asset dissolution, or a dissolution where there's already a prime, a bank is holding the lien on an asset that doesn't even cover what the lien's for. So what's actually required, I guess, is
See, the only part in law right now is what you see already there in Z.
on Z.
On page 6 of this amending language, you can see what's in law already on line 11. Charter public schools establishment, provisions for dissolution of charter public schools, including disposition of assets or amendment of its program plan.
That's all it says.
That's all it says. That's law right now.
Yeah. So it doesn't say that the state is always in the primary position for asset recovery or anything like that.
There's also law regarding Department of Justice and the charitable trusts that we didn't incorporate into here, but they are actively involved in any dissolution of a charter school, and Tal can relate how many, but they are actively involved in that, and they had several people at the meetings we had that are involved in just that area of expertise.
So to try to expedite things here, and Tal, we'll get your report in a second here. It looks, if this is a hang up on the bill, and which has basically, it doesn't have to be in this bill. This is a request of that committee, which meant to try and get it addressed. If we feel it's not addressed properly, it's actually something that probably shouldn't come to this particular committee. If you talk about the charitable trusts and the assets of, a charter.
That's commerce.
That's right. And so, but the other portions that we address on page 1 is this, seeing that we're talking about school building aid and the reimbursement of what they've already received on the school building aid. It may be if we're, seeing that there's maybe more to this story than or more issues. I know we had the Department of Justice. We also had charitable trusts testifying in that committee. And I know that Representative Fellows put them through their hoops pretty well. Good. And so, but I think that if that portion right there is going to hang this up, it really is not. It's there because we had that one section in law, item Z there, provisions that we just read. That's there, and it talks about dissolution and disposition of assets. So that it was thought, well, maybe this is a good place because that's under charter schools that in this whole section we're dealing with.
Yeah. So Rick, I do think in order for the bill to work, the bill on building aid to charters, for it to work, that members would want to know what the state's risk is going to be, because we don't have any risk with public school dissolution. There is risk with charter school dissolution, and what is that risk to the state, and especially in light of the fact that we've got a $250 million backlog of projects that we haven't been able to address for a decade. And so if you're trying to address that part in section 5 on the back page, I'd say this doesn't answer the question about risk to the state, and without language that either requires a surety bond to be in place to cover it, or something on a tapered basis over the years, or something that puts the state in the primary, in the top spot as the number one, and I think the term is perfected security interest in the assets.
Representative Luna, there were 3 recommendations came out of that committee.
Yeah.
2 of them are incorporated into this legislation right here. And line 18 is also a recommendation from them. When a charter school closes, what happens to student records? Do they go back to the resident district? Do they go to the state? How this is handled? And that has been a problem in the past. This legislation as written, I think, cleans that up. So see, there's several areas which we're trying to address in an expeditious way, dealing with when a charter school closes. It's a little bit off school building aid, and it would, however, if we're uncomfortable with either of those sections in this bill, we don't have to have them there.
So Rick, Mr. Chair, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm saying this bill is missing a section that takes the risk off the state in the event of dissolution. I would have no problem striking sections 1 through 4 and just going with section 5 and 6 in here, based on the recommendations of the dissolution committee, that the state's not held liable to others' debts. It's not that the state, it's not saying that the state gets paid back, made whole for building grant. This is saying that the state would not be held liable for any outstanding WB Mason debt or something like that the charter has in the event of dissolution. I don't think you have to say it, but by saying it, I don't think we lose anything. And I think section 6, with respect to student records, is probably a good section. So I have no problem replacing the bill with 5 and 6. But until there's something that makes it clear that the state doesn't end up holding the bag on a school building aid grant that went to a charter school, and we've got a $250 million backlog of grants to public schools, I can't see expanding the program.
Well, this bill addresses that issue of payback to the state on what they receive on the state building aid portion.
But it doesn't mandate anything be in 194B:3. It just says pursuant to a dissolution agreement per 194B:3. It's not saying the state has to get paid back. And again, going back to dissolution, generally when you're in an involuntary or voluntary dissolution, the only assets left are the building and grounds, and there may very well be a bank, in there as the first listed creditor. So I don't see how the state gets a dime back. I'm just asking, how does the state even get a dime back?
Pardon me? Representative Belcher?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I tend to agree perhaps this issue would be better resolved in commerce, but if we are going to talk about it, and we are, I think we need to examine the full reality of what would likely occur if we specified specifically that the state had primacy in any sort of dissolution for recovering funds. The fact is, if we were to put that in the law, it's highly likely that private lenders would then view any lending to such institution as an unsecured loan, which would make them much less likely eligible to receive private lending in the first place. So I think we need to look at the broad issue here and say, if we do this, if we were to do that, we're probably telling these charter schools, public schools, you're going to have to make a choice, really. Do you want any public funding here, or do you want private funding? So I think that all of it comes back to the fundamental policy issue. Do we have a responsibility to fund public schools for building aid?
Tal, let's have Tal. Tal's been sitting there for a while.
Hi, Tal Bear with the Charter School Office. As of 2006, there have been 8 charter schools that have closed. Just for context, of those 8, one was a district-approved charter, Pace Academy, and that was actually the only school of those 8 that owned a building that I'm aware of. So just a little context.
As of 2006?
As of 2000.
Since 2006.
Excuse me, since 2000. Yeah, sorry about that.
So this would include the one that closed up at the Steeplegate Mall.
Yes.
A couple of years ago.
Yep. Cap City.
Yep.
Okay, we're basically now looking at whether this bill is going to move forward or not. And trying to look at some form of a recommendation when we meet on November 13th. If in fact the latter 2 sections, 5 and 6, were not part of this bill, is the remaining part of the bill of concern to people?
Yeah, the 5 and 6, Rick, are the only parts I don't have concern with. I have concern with the remaining part of the bill, with 5 or 6 in there, or with 5 or 6 gone. Because there's no part of this bill that takes risk away from the state in the event of dissolution.
Further discussion, Representative Belcher.
I would just like to take that view and kind of flip it on its head for a moment and say, yes, there obviously is a risk to the state, as there are with all public schools. However, we're getting the benefit of private lending, being able to fund these schools and keeping the cost of taxpayers down broadly. So that's what we're risking if we don't move forward with something like this.
Further discussion? Okay, so is there any member of the public that has anything on this? Amy, do you have any input at all?
Just real minor. I don't know if the point is to go through an amendment approval, but I just wanted to point out one technical issue, and that is on page 2, line 8 and 9. That bold, I think, should be struck out. That is referring to RSA 19815U through W. That is for public school districts. That's the section that calculates building aid, which goes through formulas. That's a whole section that determines the amount of building aid somebody gets. The following paragraph simply says that charter schools qualify for 30%. So again, it's just a technical correction, but I would just not put that bold in on line 8 and 9, page 2. Because that 19815U through W does not apply to charter schools.
Okay. Yes.
So thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much, Amy. How would, in the, not the determination of the amount of the grant, but in the criteria for awarding grant, how would the department be looking at public schools and charter schools and make that determination as to who gets a grant?
There wouldn't be any difference. They all would follow the same criteria.
And that criteria is?
There's a ranking criteria. In this law, it's
Yep.
like unsafe conditions, security, consolidation, overcrowding, ADA compliance,
Okay.
things like that.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
And so the ranking it wouldn't have anything to do with the type of
Okay,
school it
thank
is. Yep.
Yeah, all the application process is the same for the public school and the charter public school. Same criteria, same law. What this is basically saying is that charter public schools may apply for a state building aid. They are a public school.
Question for you, Rick.
Yeah.
When the state board approves a charter public school, and it seems like most of the charter schools are approved through the state board, not conversion schools. But is there a facilities assessment as part of that approval process?
That would be a throwback to Amy at the department.
Okay.
Sure. So that approval process, we actually have a new approval process, but so they get their charter through the state board, but then prior to student occupancy, there's an approval process for their facility. And it's the same actually for public district schools for the most part.
Yeah.
That approval, there's a couple minor differences, but they still have to have their emergency operation plan in place. They have to test their building for asbestos. They have to test their drinking water for lead. They have to have a health inspection, a fire inspection. They have to meet building code, fire code, and the list goes on. But all of those facility requirements are the same for public schools as public chartered schools. Public district schools and public chartered schools.
Okay, thanks.
And actually non-public schools as well, except that that list is pared down to what's actually applicable to the non-public schools, which is a much more pared down list.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
And we've had public schools, regular public schools, that have had to clean their act up. and conform to that criteria and those standards we have for square footage, for health, safety. And I don't want to mention the name, but we had a school that went ahead and did some of that and had to rebake it and redo it again. So, where we are right now, we got a number of bills on the docket, and here we are already at almost noon. So, obviously,
Take a look. I would like to take a
Charitable.
look further and review my notes that I don't have from the charitable trust.
and maybe invite the charitable trust in to address that issue on the latter side. It may come down to whether you support basically the idea of a charter school being eligible for State Building 8. And if that's where you are with your principles, then obviously I know where you're going. But if you're open to charter schools receiving that type of funding support, then we got to enable that to happen, and that's what this legislation is about. So we'll stop this right now. We will reschedule 354 for another session, probably one more session. We've certainly had a number of these sessions, so we'll reschedule this one to a time to be announced. Okay. Thank you very much, Tal and Amy. Okay, the next bill which we had was on the docket today was 439, taking them in the order that they were posted at. 439 is relative to the duty to provide an education and contracts with private schools. There were two sections to this and of this bill. First part dealt with 21 inclusive. The second part was a repeal of 189:1-A Roman 4 relative to school board contracts with non-sectarian private schools to provide education is repealed. Representative Cordelli, can you explain that to us, please?
I'm just trying to find the bill.
And there you go.
Yes, this was an area of law that was left out of our previous attempts to extend services to special education students until their 22nd birthday. So it was found, it was found by someone pointed it out to us, and hence this language, just to make it consistent with the other language that we had put into statute a year or so ago.
Then this part, the bottom part there, right here, which references that law right there.
Yes. Yeah, this is in relation to manifest education hardship, and that that was also left out in terms of when we removed non-sectarian schools language from elsewhere in statute. So to be consistent, we wanted to do that here for the manifest education hardship provisions as well.
Okay, any discussion from the committee on this? Sure. Yes, go ahead.
So on 439, is it saying that that any student can remain in it should be the duty of the school board to provide additional elementary secondary education, can remain in let's just say secondary education, because I don't think we're going to get too many 21-year-olds at elementary, but can remain in a secondary school program until they turn 21?
22, it's 20.
All right, until they turn 22?
Correct, yes.
So it's basically saying if I wanted to stay in school and keep taking whatever classes that were not going to meet graduation requirements for that school, I could continue to take those classes until I turned 22.
Correct.
Okay. So every school district would have an obligation to every student, not just special education, which is the law.
Well, this is, right, this is specific to special education students. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah.
The first part, the first Roman numeral under that law deals with, and it said age 21, and it wasn't age 21 inclusive, and we've gone through that battle many, many, many times. So that changes that. The second part, it jumps through from 2, 3 to 4, and it eliminates section 4. And I had some questions as to why, that's why I'm bringing it up, as to why that is being repealed in this bill.
That's a concern too.
Why don't you read that section to everybody so they
Right.
can hear it?
This is under duty to provide education 189, 1A, Roman 4, pursuant to RSA 193:3, Roman 6. A school board may execute a contract with an approved non-sectarian private school approved by the school board as a school tuition program as defined in 193:3(7) to provide for the education of a child who resides in a district and may raise appropriate money for the purposes of the contract if the school does not have a public school at the pupil's grade level and the school board decides it is in the best interest of the child. So this goes to the town tuitioning programs. They don't have a grade level. They can execute a contract with a sectarian school as well as non-sectarian school.
That'd be a religious school.
Correct.
By eliminating that Roman 4, though, are we eliminating the capability? It's one of these areas of law that I understand the intent, which maybe it was set for, but are we also now taking away that legislation enabling a district to contract with some other district to take these children because they don't have that grade level within their sending district? So are we taking that capability away from the district?
I don't believe so. I think this is just related to that basically that one provision. I'll look up the statute.
Yes, Representative Cascadden.
Thank you. I'm a little confused on that too, because you mentioned manifest educational hardship, which is a process
Right.
to get to that. And was this line 8 and 9 already in the current statute? Or is it new to this bill that we're removing something? I understand the 21st up to 22nd.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been doing that pretty consistently to apply the way it needs to be, but if this is repealed, does that take some authority away from the local board? I don't know. I just need more clarification on it. Because a board would engage in a contract no matter what kind of learning.
Yeah, see, I'm confused too. That it says in part 2 of this legislation, relative to school board contracts with non-sectarian private schools to provide education is repealed. So if you are a district and you have a child that's gone through the best interest and all that, you have manifest education and a hardship, and it's been approved by that local board, and they're looking now to try to send this child to another receiving district, can they do that if in fact we're saying that section of law is repealed?
Why is it missing?
I don't believe that's in the current law. I'm not finding it under 189 1-A. It goes up to a section 3.
No, there's a section
Or
4.
is there a section 4?
Yes.
Okay, then I'm not on the
Roman
right
4.
one.
I've got it right here.
Okay.
Right.
So, Rick,
Yes.
so looking at, this is one of those things where I think we've got duplicative, a lot of duplicative language in the law. And 189, 1A, Roman 4 refers to 193:3, Roman 6. And Roman 6 reads, if there's no public school for the child's grade in the resident district, the school board may contract, so very similar language, with another public school in another school district or with any private school. So not just a
Right.
non-sectarian
Yeah.
private school.
And it also references Roman 7.
What's that?
It does
Right.
Roman 6 and Roman 7.
And
So why would you want to repeal?
Well,
because it puts the requirement that it be a non-sectarian school as opposed
Right.
to a religious school. Means the contract could be with a religious
Right.
school.
and we have the town tuitioning already in 193.3, where we made the change so that they can contract with any private school, as was read. So this does not need to be in
It's 354.
189,
We're on the
because it's
second.
in 193.
Needs to be.
Further discussion? Okay, I think we need to just, make sure that we're not undoing something that we don't want to undo. Representative Dry. Need longer arms.
Thank God for this annotated version. Thank you. It basically says that 193.3 used to say what the one we're trying to repeal now said.
Right.
And so I think you can see that they already did this in one place and it's still hanging over here in the other. And so therefore this
Right.
is a
It's another area where we missed one section of statute, because we made the change in 193.3 to say any private school.
Yeah.
And that got signed into law, but we missed this section in 189.
Didn't take it out.
And didn't, right.
Okay. Further discussion? Okay, I think with, everybody should be looking at it and, is there anybody that's objecting to this bill right now then? One? Yes, Representative.
I'm not
Okay.
clear on that piece.
So we need more clarity then on Roman 4.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, we'll try and get that and make it available when we're discussing this on November 13th. Or when we come back to further treatment before, we could have it at the same time.
Need more clarity.
Okay, next one, which we had in the order of where we are here, just did, SB 25. It's the next one, I think, on the list out in the hallway.
Didn't we already OTP?
Yes, the decision on that was,
There are two bills,
there were,
I think one of them fell already.
as I recall, I think maybe we held on to this in case, not knowing what would happen on the
Yeah,
other side.
The other one became law.
Right.
yeah, so this one, we don't need this bill, it's duplicative.
Yeah,
Okay, so we're done with the 25.
so it's 25.
Which one?
PL.
25?
Yeah,
Okay.
Okay, next one we had was HB 627. This is relative to local education improvement plans and disparities in education. That was Representative Lekis's bill. It was very complex. I think it was trying to redo 193H. And we know that we've had a long discussion regarding this on the others. What's the feeling of the committee on it? Yes.
Rick, way back when when we first heard that back in February, under section 2 on page 3, the question of disparity was we're supposed to be getting a definition. Do we ever get to define what persistent disparity was?
Yeah, I see that.
I'm on page 2, line 21. We'd asked for a definition of persistent disparity. I didn't know if that came in yet, because it's been 6 months.
The whole area we're trying to modify here is that through one bill, we're tackling an awful lot.
Right.
And it's overwhelming. It's just like 266 was.
Right.
And I don't think we're at that point where we need to be rewriting improvement plans and the assessment and improvement plans. Looking at section 193C, 193H. A lot of that has to do too with our federal plan, our application process.
ESSA plan, yeah.
ESSA?
So,
My gut feeling is on this one right here, it's a step too far at this point in time.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And during the hearing, I think Representative Lekas mentioned that much of the language had been taken from a bill that I had sponsored a couple of years ago. I think
The accountability section.
Yeah, I think this language by itself doesn't hold. It's really part of more comprehensive changes that consider this accountability as part of what's being funded in education. So I agree with the chair.
So I think the recommendation ought to be ITL in this. Is there any objection? Nope. Okay, go on to the next one then. Let's see, 150, no, we did 155. 147, HB 147, that's the Special Ed Advisory Council. Bill? And the makeup of that council, which we spent a lot of time on. Yes. So we do have several amendments on that. We had an amendment by Representative Tanner. We have a Representative Cordelli amendment. Does everybody have a copy of those? We handed them out at the last meeting.
Excuse me, Chair.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm a little late. There were two amendments, so Lyndon, Representative Tanner and I drafted.
Yes.
And I don't know if they've made it up here yet. She was going to, there was a delay in putting them together.
Uh-huh. Do you have any, so we don't have that here right now?
So that's still an OLS, you're saying?
I think so.
Wow, it's taken a long time.
Yeah.
Question, Chair.
I could,
Peggy, was that to replace Linda's 147 amendment or addition to?
is it there? Yeah, I think it's a new one that was directed by the committee for us to put together at the last session. And basically what it did is it removed one member of the Senate.
Yeah.
It was designed to allow people to serve dual roles as both the parent and a different like a teacher or a representative like that. And it was, the third part of it was to add a medical professional, but we prepared it twice, two different ways, one with the medical professional and one without. And since that time, we've gotten a lot of different feedback. So Representative Tanner and I have been looking at that amendment again, and in particular looking at that dual role piece, because since our last meeting, we've gotten a lot of feedback from different parent representatives that that's not really what they're interested in. The issue isn't really so much the quorum, it's more the majority itself. And they feel that by putting in a dual role, it would kind of dilute the parent representative role. So in looking at the amendment that is being drafted currently, we've taken that piece out.
Thank you.
Further comments about this bill here from the committee? Yes, Representative Damon.
Thank you, and my apologies for being late. I would like to speak in favor of including the medical professional, not necessarily a physician, but a licensed healthcare provider, primary care provider. Both because I initially thought that that was valuable, but also I've had a lot of feedback from the population that they would prefer that to be the case and see a need for it.
Chair, excuse me, I believe the actual language in there is healthcare provider.
Is there any objection to putting a healthcare provider on that council? I don't think there is.
The feedback I've
Yeah.
gotten is supportive of that as well.
Okay. So when you're doing your amendment, make sure that's in there, Representative Albany.
So it was at the direction of the committee, then perhaps just put the one amendment with including the healthcare provider and not do the one without the healthcare provider?
Yeah, now, what are the other two components that you've added? You know, you took out one senator, right? Or one, was it a senator? Yeah.
Essentially, there's one senator out, and basically if we remove all the language about the dual role, it reverts back to the original language that would be in there. And the only other addition was the election of the chairperson, vice chair, and a clerk.
Okay, now, Representative Cordell, you had in your amendment, I don't believe you were at that meeting, were you? When we had that discussion last time?
Maybe.
I don't know, maybe you were, I think you were at the vets that day.
Yeah.
Okay. You have scratched out on your amendment.
Yes.
Everybody have a copy of Representative Cordelli's amendment?
That was Amendment 2309.
Yeah.
2309.
2309. I have 205. Just the one.
That's 2309. 2309, it's October 5th.
Yeah, 2309 was the one that was given out at the last one.
What's it? 2309, yeah. 2309 is right, dated,
October 5th.
correct.
October 5th.
Okay.
October 5th?
Glenn, what's the date of the latest one?
October 8th.
So this, so the date
Excuse me.
September 10th?
Mine says October 5th.
Mine too. So is there a difference between the October 5th amendment and the
September
October
10th.
8th amendment?
The number is the same, though. It's 2309. Is that?
Same number, but different date?
That's weird. Yeah, that is.
Wait a minute. 10/8, October 5th. So which one? October 5th,
I'm
10/8.
lost.
I think it's the way we're reading it. It says 10/8 underneath.
Oh, yeah, right,
October
right. Right, yes.
Okay.
October 5th, yes.
We're on the road.
Okay, can you explain what you
Yes.
have there?
This, go over the changes in this. It makes it 16 individuals with disabilities or parents of children with disabilities. It makes it 2 members of the House of Representatives appointed by the Speaker of the House, 1 member of the Senate, It removes one local education official who shall be an administrator appointed by the governor. It changes 2 teachers to 1 teacher who is a special ed teacher. That's in the revised F. Then it removes the representatives of the Disability Rights Center and the Parent Information Center. It changes 2 individuals with disabilities who have received services to 1 individual. And then further down with the Department of Corrections, it makes it 1 representative from the Department of Corrections who is responsible for administering special education. And then the addition of the clerk to be appointed and the healthcare provider, as we just discussed.
Okay. Yes, Representative Woodcock, then Representative Damon.
Thank you. Glenn, can you clarify on why the deletion of the Parent Information Center or Disability Rights section? Why that person?
I think that from my experience, it's more important.
You on, Glenn?
You're sorry. I should be in practice by now. It's more important. The focus of the federal law is a majority of parents, and that should be the focus. I don't think that the representatives of those 2 organizations are in the forefront of what the commission is tasked with doing. I think the primary focus should be the parents there and teachers, et cetera, who are directly involved in special education. So I don't think that they are required in this council, and they are not required under federal law either. We tried to stick more with what's required under federal law with these changes.
Thank you.
Representative Damon, did you have your hand up?
I had the same question as Representative Woodcock and also wanted to know in the amendment from Representative Tanner and Balboni, what you folks did with those 2 positions, disability rights and parent information.
The amendment that we put together kept those 2 positions in.
Thank you.
Representative Cascadden.
Oops. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious if you know why DRC and PIC were included in the law initially. They are the first resources to provide to parents and really add clarity sometimes to problem solve some very serious issues. So do you know why it was in there initially? What was the role and what was the function, and why is there no need for it? I don't know.
I think they were added before my time, so I'm not sure why they were added. But I think that in terms of the Parent Information Center, they do things other than special education. So I think that that's one reason that the other representative and I felt it was necessary to remove it. And from our experience, I was a member for several terms, and Representative Kitab is currently a member of the SAC.
Yes, Representative Dry.
Thank you. Representative Cordelli, how many people would be on the committee if you adopted your amendment?
I think it was something like 24.
I'm getting a lot higher number just
Right, I
going
just
through this.
counted it.
Yeah.
Only now I can't remember. I counted it with Disability Rights and Parent Info Center. It comes out to the 16 parents and 19 other people.
Yeah. So
I think I have that right. So
19
without, it would be 17
Right.
to 16. So it's still either way. It's not a parent majority.
Right.
follow up, please.
Yeah.
So the idea, I thought, of this bill was to make this committee function, and it's not functioning at the large size that it's at. So we're just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic here.
That was the original purpose of the bill, was to shrink it and keep a parent majority because of the dysfunction that parents and legislators have viewed over a period of time. And I think any committee or commission with 36, 38 members, even trying to get a quorum, whether it's online, in person, and trying to respect the opinions and get feedback at meetings from 38 people is quite an obstacle to having an efficient meeting, especially, trying to get a meeting done even within 2 hours is a chore. And that's why, truthfully, when Representative Katab said she was interested, I said, great, she can take my place.
Representative Balboni?
I just want to refer back to a lot of the feedback that I've gotten from a lot of the parent representatives that are on the committee. They feel that the committee is not effectively representing the concerns of the parents. And I believe what they're trying to achieve with this is to make sure that it goes back to a parent majority and that the focus is on the parents' concerns. Now, I can't speak to how that dysfunction arose, and I've heard differing opinions about what's going on, but it seems clear to me that they feel like they're not getting the appropriate data that they need to make informed decisions, and that perhaps they're not getting the support that they need from the Department of Education. So one of the things that Representative Tanner and I were also looking into was making sure that they had funds that were available to help with workshops and to bring in speakers and resources that they can use to help get the information that they need to make those decisions.
If I could.
Just one comment here. A number of our committees, when we put them together, we have technical support placed on these committees as non-voting members. In other words, they're there to provide assistance and support. Oftentimes, like, for example, in CTE Advisory Council, we have Jeff there to provide us the guidance. In fact, Jeff even chairs it. Then we had just a group dealing with the teacher shortage, and we had Steve Appleby there to give us technical support throughout. So if the primary purpose for some of the organizations to be there is to provide support to parents, they don't necessarily have to be a voting member. They can be there and contribute and be very active participants. So that's something we might want to consider as well.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Representative Cordelli.
Thank you. I think that's one reason that we had added the appointment of a clerk. I think, in my experience, the council went way overboard in looking for staff from the Department of Education to provide services for them. I went to the commissioner on a number of occasions about that myself because it was not called for in statute in any way, shape, or form, and to have director of special education or somebody else along those lines taking minutes for them, I think, was way out of bounds. And so that they should appoint their own clerk to do their own minutes.
Representative Cascadden and Representative Cornell.
I think it would make sense for me then to amend line 27, 28, 29, the DRC and PIC, to be members of this committee in a non-voting capacity or advisory, but they should be included somehow. But really, the final decision on the information that they glean would be with the parents.
Yeah, we've oftentimes just written as non-voting members. So they're members, but they're not voting. We do that in a number of capacities. For example, even a student on a school board may not vote on some issues, which are dealing with staff and personal and confidential information. So Representative Cornell, you had, and then Representative Petronel.
At our last subcommittee meeting, we spent a great deal of time on this. And I think a couple of the things, like two teachers, I think it said in federal law that you had to have two for this commission. That's why we put, instead of one, we put back the two. And I think the other one was the one individual with the disabilities. I think it was that one that was two individuals is in law. Federal law that has to be on the advisory council. And then we had a long discussion about the county corrections, because many times a young person with disabilities will be placed in the county corrections for a year. And if they aren't getting any kind of special education, that really is against the law. Because they're still under 21, so they should be still getting it. And you could spend quite a bit of time in county corrections. And also the disabilities in the Parent Information Center. I can remember from when I was a school counselor that especially the Parent Information Center would come and with the parent and student as their representative to make sure that their rights were being heard at the school, to make sure that the school wasn't, not providing everything that they were entitled to. So I always saw them as a special education student and parent representative for that. So thank you.
Representative Petronel?
Thank you. Is this committee open to the public?
Yes. Well, it is if we see we need that support, because it's not technically a hearing. This is a work session of the full committee. We've had the hearings on this bill.
No, this, not the committee
I
we're
see
in
what you're
right
saying.
now, this committee that we're discussing.
I've been there, and it's over the years, it's been managed differently.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is if these positions the positions we're discussing removing, they could always attend the meetings of SAC and offer input. Correct?
Anybody can attend.
And if they need it,
if you're not on the committee or the council, you got to be recognized in order to speak.
So if somebody wanted to ask their advice, request an offer of input, or they could
It's like
do
a
that?
school board. Sometimes you just got to get on the docket. Yeah. Representative Myler.
No, thank you. I mean, obviously, this is a large body to get together to try to do any kind of work. And I'm sensitive to that. But, for the 12 years I've been on this committee, both the Disability Rights Center and the Parent Information Center have provided valuable information to this committee on the topics that they deal with. And I don't understand, I understand the trying to get the numbers down, but their resource has been so valuable to this community, to this group. I would hate like heck to have them not be able to sit at the table. I'm assuming this committee makes decisions. And so if they're going to make decisions, they want to make informed decisions, I guess these representatives could attend and try to get their hand in, but you know as well as I that if you don't have a seat at the table and a right to vote, the information can just go out there without not really being taken seriously. So I do have, Glenn, I have a real concern about them not being there because of what's been said here as far as how they advocate for parents, et cetera. They may not be parents, but they do advocate for families, et cetera. And so I've got serious concerns about the removal of them from this committee?
Okay, there's one issue I think we need to address or attend to. For example, we have committees which require that a school administrator be a member of the committee, and just many committees. And then do we ask ourselves, should we allow the lobbyists from the School Administrators Association, be it maybe Mark McLean now, who is the director of that. I don't know if he's a lobbyist or if Jerry Frew is a lobbyist, or I know that in the School Boards Association, Barrett Christina is a lobbyist. But we oftentimes have a school board member put on a committee of type, but not necessarily one right out of the office who's the lobbyist. Should a lobbyist be placed on a group like this, or should be a member of that association or organization to be appointed as a member? Lobbyist or somebody from the organization? Lobbyist might be a member of that organization, but they're also, being paid to do a job. Pardon me?
I understand your comment, Rick. I just don't understand. Is there anyone on this listing, this volume of folks here that are categorized as lobbyists? I didn't see that.
We can ask the group right here.
On the numbers that Glenn had and the ones we have.
There's two organizations we're talking about, right? The Disability Rights Center and the Parent Information Center.
Right.
Does the Disability Rights Center have a lobbyist? Yes, in attendance today.
Right.
Now, if you were to have a member, do you have a second? Come on up here. No, I'm talking right here.
Good morning. It's still morning. I'm Karen Rosenberg. I'm the policy director. Actually, it's not still morning. I'm the policy director at the Disability Rights Center. And I've been at the Disability Rights Center for about 18 years now, first as an attorney, senior staff attorney representing children through their parents in a variety of matters, but really specializing in education cases for children with disabilities. A couple of years ago, our policy director retired, and so I am now the policy director, and as such, I have registered as a lobbyist. The only lobbying I do, however, is on behalf of the Disability Rights Center, my employer, always consistent with our strategic plan, our organization's mission, which is to advocate for the rights of individuals with disabilities. That includes the students and their parents who we represent.
So is there a conflict if you're also a lobbyist and a participant on a council like this?
I don't see a conflict. The AG's office was asked to weigh in on this. They did not see a conflict. I'm still me, right? I am still an employee of the Disability Rights Center.
Yeah.
And my education and this, the amount of work I've done to learn education law and what the rights are under federal and state law for children with disabilities has remained consistent. And it's not like I am lobbying for anybody else. If I was also employed and lobbying for an organization that had interests that were contrary to the interests of the Disability Rights Center, so that I could not necessarily consistently represent our organization's interest and role in this organization, I could see a conflict. But I don't see a conflict there where all I'm doing is advancing, our organization's mission, which is to ensure that the rights of people with disabilities are met.
Further questions?
Question?
No. I just got another question.
Okay, so it's not to Karen then?
No, it's to Karen.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen. Representative Balboni, do you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Karen?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious, so if you did not have that position, would there be somebody else who was not a lobbyist that could take the position representing your organization?
I don't know that there would be another person who would be available right now to step into this role. We have really limited resources. I think that I was appointed because of my expertise and experience representing parents, well, children through their parents and education matters. So I can't answer that question.
Thank you.
Did your predecessor, was he a lobbyist?
I believe he was registered as a lobbyist. So my predecessor was our former executive director, Dick Cohen, and I'm 85% sure he also was a registered lobbyist, but you all may know better than me. Actually, you would know Bonnie probably.
Okay, further questions of Karen?
It's not so much for Karen, but if what you're lobbying for is students and families with disabilities to get their rights, I don't see that as a problem with being a lobbyist. I guess.
I think that this even goes to the level of beyond us right here, because this is, every committee could possibly have this question asked. And probably it has to be addressed by another attorney that's employed by the House. In fact, it may have been, I don't know. I just want to be walking very carefully. Representative Damon, and then.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. So I was just going to articulate in the federal regulation, it says the state must establish and maintain an advisory panel for the purpose of providing policy guidance with respect to special education and related services for children with disabilities in the state. Would I be correct in thinking that that is in fact a major purpose of your organization?
Yes. And it's also a big part of what I do as the policy director at Disability Rights Center.
So I echo Representative Cornell. This seems completely compatible and not a conflict of interest. Also, a follow-up one more. You did say that the Attorney General reviewed that capacity.
So this had been asked, and there's an Assistant Attorney General was asked this very question, and I don't know if she's still with the AG's office, but she came to a meeting that we had and said that she did not see a conflict.
Are you talking about Anne?
It wasn't Anne. Remember it was? Yeah, I don't remember who it was, but it was someone who followed Chris Bond after Chris went full-time to the AG's office.
Yeah.
Elizabeth
Oh,
Brown.
Liz? Yeah. Okay, she went to DOE. Yeah. Okay, further questions of Karen? Oh, Representative Noble, you? Not of Karen, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Noble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we might have some parents that are on the committee, and is it possible that we could hear their opinion on
If you
this?
desire. Yes, come on forward.
Hi, my name is Karen Stokes. I'm the current chair of the SAC committee. So I was able to watch the video from the last time. So I was just here if anybody had any questions relating to the current SAC makeup.
So I'll ask you a question. You heard a lot of suggestions as who should or should not be on the council.
Yes.
As chair of the council, what's your recommendation?
So I was looking at the numbers, and I do want to make sure that you are aware that there's currently 22 positions that are not parent positions. So when you look at the makeup, if you added 16, that still would not give us the parent makeup. After having conversations with multiple, again, I'm just the parent, so I don't represent the full SAC. I just want to make sure I say that. So we would need more than 16 in order to get a parent majority. And they are not in support of the dual roles, which I kind of think you guys are not. I do say the DRC and the PIC, I've only been the chair for one meeting and it ran very smoothly. Just want to add that. But I did talk with somebody that was on the committee, and she's been on the committee for 8 years. I personally feel that I'm a parent advocate through PIC, so I've done their training, which is an amazing organization, as well as the DRC. but I've been told that in the last 8 years that there was a member on, they have not produced any information or any data. So I think they have a wealth of information, but how do we get them to share it with us? Because without that data and without that information, it's not overly helpful. So again, I've only had one committee meeting, so my hope would be that they are going to share that data in the future, and I have not personally asked them if they're willing to. I just don't know. They just never have in the last 8 years, to my knowledge.
Thank you. Yes, Representative Balboni?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you say that you've been given adequate support from the Department of Education to help this group achieve its mission?
No. As far as the clerk goes, we were able to find somebody that is a parent that has stepped up to take our minutes, so that's fine. The internet too, I don't know if that's an issue, but I also want to make sure I address that. But we did ask Rebecca Fredette from the DOE at our last meeting if we had any funds, because we wanted somebody to come and help us with the direction, to help us find our purpose. Because again, I think we all realize we're not very functional right now, which we're not. And the comment that was made to me was, you have no money. We have money, but you have no money. And I think we were asking for it was a little about $600 for somebody to come and help us with our goal. We're a parent-led committee. And again, I'm a school board member in my town. I work for an area agency. We're knowledgeable, but we need direction. And without any kind of funds, we're kind of stuck, which is unfortunate. I'd also like to address the internet. It was brought up that we have a remote option. In the last year, before I was the chair, our remote option is absolutely deplorable, in my opinion. You were there at the last committee, so I think that you would back this up. Per the law, it states that you have to be able to hear and be heard if you're on a remote option. That was not possible. We're given the facility by the DOE, so they give us the meeting place, which is in Concord, and then they're all supposed to set up the Wi-Fi. And in the last year that I've been on the committee, it's pretty much always been an issue. September, I don't believe was an issue, but June was an issue. Our remote option and our remote access is just not feasible for a full committee to be able to have a remote option. So that's a really big concern for some of our parents, because as you know, you've stated, parents are unfortunately dealing with their children with a disability, or they have, illnesses. And so having that remote option is really important for us. And it's again, you were there. It wasn't a great option.
We got some hands up here.
Sorry.
Representative Dry, then Representative Cornell, and then back to Representative Balboni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for answering these questions.
Thank you.
Are your 16 positions filled right now with parents?
I think we have 15, but our parents don't show up a lot. So it would be great if we had more, because again, these parents are working, they're dealing with personal issues and with disabilities. So when you only have the bare minimum of what makes up your parent majority, you're probably never going to get a committee where it's a parent majority in voting.
Okay, follow up, please.
Yeah.
So it's not really a question of needing to find more parents to add, it's just them being able to be there.
Well, if you have 22 positions that are currently non-parents and you have 16 positions that are parents, you don't even need that majority. Yeah, math doesn't really support that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Cornell.
Now that the DOE is in the process or have already moved into the building where I think they allow you to have your meetings, might not the video get maybe hopefully better?
So the meeting we had last month has been the meeting that we've used in the last year. So I don't think that's the factor.
Where are you meeting?
Granite State College.
At the State College.
Yeah.
Okay.
And by the way, we do ask ahead of time if the internet and everything is going to be good, and we're told yes. And then when we get there, it's kind of I don't want to use the term, but you know what I'm saying.
Representative Myler.
Yeah, I hate to say this, but I think there's an elephant in the room that nobody's addressing, and that is the lack of resources for this committee.
Correct.
So to me, it's not the number that are there. It's the whole approach to dealing with this committee. And that's not addressed in the law, in in the amendment that's here. So I think we see this oftentimes before the committee, where you've got other issues that are out there that can't be addressed by it. And it would seem to me, as Representative Balboni has said, without the kind of resources that should be available for the committee, whether it be internet, whether it be staff, whatever, it doesn't make any difference who's on that committee because they're not going to show up if it's not going to function.
Correct.
And it needs some assistance. And with the federal dollars that come into the department, it was sure as hell seemed to me that there ought to be some money put aside so this group could in fact function. And so I guess that's my frustration as I've listened to this conversation. It's not the numbers. It's clear the numbers are an issue, no question, but it goes way beyond the issue of the functionality of this particular committee and not having the right governmental support to make sure that they can meet their mission.
And I would like to add to that, you are 100% correct, and I support everything you just said. If you're a parent who's been on the committee, and we have called parents, so this is truthful. When you call a parent and they're working hard and they're taking care of their kids and they go to a committee and it's just not functioning, how much of your time do you waste? Because there's so many other things that they can do, and they want to take their time and they want to join a committee. And then in the past year that I've been on, it was either run for chair or step down. So hopefully this is going to be the change that we have, and we do have some really good parents that are on there, but how do we get those parents re-engaged to be able to move forward when you don't have any funds to help you be able to move forward? It's that vicious circle. So thank you for presenting that. It's true.
I'd like to just cut in on this. I'm looking at the membership on the council. Is there a member on this council from the Department of Education, Special Education?
Correct, Rebecca Fredette.
Okay, I'm trying to find out where she's located on this litany of people.
It's on my phone, I can grab it. But
Which
part of the state positions.
Read it, what's it say?
One state education position.
Okay, that doesn't do it for me. It doesn't say from the Department of Education, technical support or something such as that.
Correct.
I've been over at the department when there has been a member on the committee that provides technical support or is a voting member. The rooms are always set up and ready to go because there is a person from the department that's participating on that council. Our council, Representative Cornell, is always done well. All the committees for CTE are done right. When we've been over there for other issues dealing with safety and security in schools, it's always done correctly. So I think the error that we have done as a legislator, we haven't said that there's an individual from the Department of Education appointed by the commissioner. I don't see that on this at all. Appointed by the state, by the governor. There's no accountability in that. Whereas if we have somebody like a Jeff Beard or we have somebody like a Steve Appleby who's there on that committee, then I think we're going to tie in all your money issues are there, taken care of. Your place to meet is there. Your streaming and everything online is taken care of. Pardon me?
Amend 18.
I think this is something that has to be amended in the bill. And I think Representative Meyer is correct that we haven't hit what the issue is here. I think this is one way to get around it.
Is it a problem that they meet at 5 o'clock and
that used to be the big problem. They used to meet on Thursday afternoons at 4 o'clock, right in the middle session. And legislators could never attend because you leave the hall and it's a close vote. You can't leave.
It's also difficult for parents to, especially parents that are working, to come at 4:30.
well, I don't mean you should go during the day. I mean, having someone from the department saying you have to stay at 5 o'clock for the meeting.
That is so, yes.
If I could, the entire time I was on, and since then, the special education director has been a member of the committee. And in addition, I think on occasion, Melissa White from Division of Instruction also attends the meetings. So there is no lack of Department of Education participation anyway on the council.
I think what we're going to have to do before we go much further, Representative Myler and I both have a meeting starting up at 1 o'clock. And and I don't even know where that is. 101 downstairs, okay. Or no, that's in the other building, downstairs. So we're not getting through this today, but we're going to have some coming together and trying to fix this. So maybe what I ought to do right now is appoint a smaller group to try to nail this thing down. So when we do come back, a working group, just, maybe at max 5 people. We don't want a lot of people on it, just to try. Pardon me? 24. Is there anybody like to be on a working group and to try to nail this down a little bit? Representative Balboni, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think that, thank you, Mr. Chair, that probably both, I'm probably speaking for Representative Tanner, but we've already started this, so we'd be more than happy to continue to try to reach a
Is there anybody like
resolution.
to work with Representative Tanner and Representative Balboni in trying to come back with some? Because we're going to meet one more time on this, and that's going to be it, because then we're going to have November 13th right on top of us. That's just right around the corner. So we got to get some resolution on this. Anybody else would like to work on that? Is there Representative Cascadden? You could do it. I'm not saying how to do it. Just get it done. Okay, folks, come up with something, will you please?
Can we find out, I know when Jeff comes to our meetings, he also brings technical help with him from his department within the department. So I don't know if Becky is always going to the meetings, if she could bring someone administrative help with her.
What the problem has been is that Granite State is their home now, but it's just recently they've had areas within that building leased out to other organizations, and their leases weren't up. And so now they're closing and the building is becoming more of one building. And with that, the technical people are able to get in and give assistance. I think what we've got is if we can get like a director or an individual like Becky Fredette as the person, she then has the ability to pull in the technical support there. And I know that's what Steve and that's what Jeff do. So another director could do the same. So I don't think it's really where we have to, I think the support is there. It's got to come internally from DOE to make sure things are set up properly. There's, the Legislative Youth Advisory Council too. You're familiar with that one where they come up with legislation and all that. That's always never had support either. The one that's always had to run that was Susan, representative out of, where's she at? Sugar Hill or? Sue Ford. And so, but this is a notch up though. This is a group which really does need support. I think we can do it. And I appreciate it if you look at making sure that it's really defined in this legislation that a person, whether they're voting or not, I don't care, but they need to have the technical support has to be there from the department.
Amen.
Okay, so I got 4 minutes to eat my lunch and you can, but I'm not going to be able to be here for that. It's just, I know Mel and I have to get out of here and I think we both have some things we got to do prior to that. So, I would advise if there is somebody from the audience who wants to give some input, contact Representative Cascadden or Representative Balboni or Representative Tanner that are going to be working on this. And so we can get something, we will, with the other bills, the time to be announced will be announced. We'll look at the calendar, see when we can meet. But you got about a week or so here to get going on that. We're running out of time. Thank you very much. We're going to have to close this thing down. People are running. Thank you very much for coming today. Yeah, it's a thrill, isn't it?
Yes, I got you last time.